Okay, good evening, everybody. My name's Lawrence Walsh. I'm the chair of this planning committee. On my right is Councillor Aidan Williams, who's the vice chair. On my left are senior planning officers. On my further right are officers from highways, legal and democratic services. Down both legs of the table are members of the council who make up this planning committee. Just some housekeeping for you before we start. Fire safety advice. Before I start, I would just like to convey fire safety advice for this evening. If the alarm or continuous siren sounds, please could I ask that you leave the building in a calm manner by the nearest fire exit by proceeding left out of the room and down the main stairwell and out of the main civic entrance, which is opposite. Everyone should assemble at the front of the town hall and must not re-enter the building until instructed to do so. If you have a disability which could affect your means of escape, could you please inform a member of staff so that arrangements can be made for your safe evacuation? And we have some broadcast information for you. Please be aware that this meeting will be recorded for live and for subsequent broadcast on the council's YouTube channel. The whole of the meeting will be recorded except where there are confidential or exempt items. This activity promotes democratic engagement in accordance with section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972. The cameras will focus on the proceedings of the meeting and avoid areas specifically designated for members of the public. If you object to being filmed, please remain seated in the public seating area. And all members and officers must use the microphone provided to enable the audio to be picked up by the system. Members are reminded to turn off their microphones when they are not formally addressing the committee. I'll go to attendances, and I think everybody's present who's a normal member of the planning committee. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Members to give notice of any personal prejudicial interest and the nature of that interest relating to any item on the agenda in accordance with the adopted code of conduct. Anybody? Councillor Coggins. Thank you, Councillor Coggins. It's not strictly an interest, Councillor Coggins, but we understand what you're saying. Councillor Evans.
I won't step out, but I won't enter the debate for the House Timber. I own 1 and 2 Florence Street and got controlling interest in 168 and 187 Cross Street.
A question has been submitted and rejected as it was considered to be part outside the remit of the committee and in part has been addressed as part of the planning process. Additional information, item number 5. There are copies of the additional information at the front. If any members of the public want to pick those up, they're just there. And before we go to item 6, just a note from myself. Just a quick reminder to members of the planning committee, myself included, that as well as our local knowledge, we look to our local development plan as a basis for decision making and other background papers listed at the beginning of agenda item 6 for guidance when making decisions this evening. Okay, so we'll go to our first application this evening, and that will be Brown Street. And that is page 36. And Miss Coley is going to give some introduction to this item. Miss Coley.
Thank you, Chairman. Members have a lengthy and complex report before them. I'm not going to attempt to summarise that report, but give an overview of the proposals before the committee and highlight the key points from the additional information report. The application seeks full planning permission for a residential development comprising the erection of 10 townhouses, an apartment block comprising 12 apartments and a 2-storey decked car park. All 12 apartments are to be provided as affordable housing units on a shared ownership basis, representing a 55% affordable housing provision. The site is an existing public pay and display car park located outside, but immediately adjacent to, the Hale Station Conservation Area. There are a number of listed buildings nearby. The site is not within Hale District Centre, but is in close proximity to the district centre boundary. The planning application has attracted a high level of public interest, with almost 300 objections and 1 letter of support. Objections have been received from local residents and interest groups, including Hale Civic Society and Hale Community Trust, along with ward councillors and the MP. Objectors have engaged planning and other professionals to assist in making objections. The points of objection are summarised in the officer report, and where new issues have been raised since the publication of that report, the additional information. The key concerns raised include, but are not restricted to, the scale of the proposal, the design of the scheme, the impact on the amenity of existing residents, the level of car parking provision proposed for the residential units, and the reduction in the number of public parking spaces which would be available within the car park following completion of the development. Additionally, objectors consider Brown Street is already too narrow and unsuitable for the development, whilst existing on-street parking pressures will be exacerbated. Concerns are also raised in relation to the impact that the reduction in the number of public parking spaces available within the car park might have on the vitality and viability of Hale District Centre. A package of images has been distributed to members of the committee by the Hale Civic Society and the Hale Community Trust. These have not been produced using any recognised or verified imaging process and significantly overstate the impact of the development. Concern has been raised in respect of the robustness of survey and other data officers rely on in coming to their conclusions. All the survey evidence referred to in the report is considered to be robust and well-founded, and surveys undertaken in a proportionate and reasonable way. As set out in the additional information, a solicitor's letter has been received representing the Forward Property Group. This letter firstly raises concerns about the public procurement process by which the council has sought a partner for the redevelopment of the Brown Street car park. This is not material to the consideration of the planning application. It then goes on to raise 3 representations in respect of the main officer report, summarised as follows. The planning application seeks permission for a public car park, but there is no mechanism in planning conditions to ensure that the car park is publicly available into the future. It requests details of the legal means by which this important public resource will be kept as a public car park in the event planning permission is granted. Details are requested of the legal mechanism by which the recycling of receipts from the staircasing of shared ownership properties can be secured and invested into other affordable housing in Trafford. The letter seeks confirmation of the legal means by which the terms of the planning conditions securing affordable housing, which is condition 3, will be monitored and enforced. Concern is raised that the officer report does not discuss the exceptional circumstances required by the MPPG to justify a condition, the effect of which is to require the execution of a separate legal agreement. In response, firstly, the reference to a public car park is in the description of development, and the facilities shown on approved plans, which are benefits of the scheme, would be secured by condition 2. A materially different proposal would therefore require a different planning application to be approved. The council will retain its interest in the land and manage the car park on completion. It is the council's stated intention to maintain the car park for public use, but nevertheless any subsequent closure or privatisation of the car park would be subject to public consultation outside of the planning process. There is no planning mechanism by which the car park is currently secured for public use. Planning conditions need to meet the 6 tests set out in the MPPG, including of necessity and relevance to planning, and should not duplicate other legislation. There is clear community support for maintaining a public parking facility in this location, but strictly in planning terms, given the evidence in respect to parking capacity in Hale, there is no reason to do so through the planning process. A condition would not, therefore, meet the tests set out in the MPPG. In respect to the second point, the following should be read in conjunction with paragraph 19 of the main report. There's no legal mechanism by which the receipts from the staircasing of shared ownership properties can be secured. This is reported in paragraph 210 of the main report, and furthermore is acknowledged as a departure from the development plan, specifically policy L2.15. Advice in the MPPG is that where a matter can be controlled by condition, this should be used in preference to a Section 106 agreement. Affordable housing can be secured by condition, and no Section 106 agreement is proposed. However, the main report in paragraphs 220 to 222 then carries out the necessary exercise where there is a departure from development plan policy, giving appropriate weight to that policy and the MPPF, and concludes that there are material considerations which justify this departure. With respect to the final point, condition 3 relating to affordable housing will be monitored and enforced in the same way as would any planning condition. If there is a breach of the condition, appropriate action would be taken under the Planning Acts. The condition does not require the execution of a legal agreement. A further consultation response has now been received from the lead local flood authority, suggesting a planning condition by which a suitable drainage scheme can be secured, and in doing so raising no objection to the proposals. The objection from United Utilities is considered to be unreasonable, as in accordance with guidance in MPPG, a planning condition can appropriately control the drainage hierarchy. Where planning conditions can be used to mitigate the impact of the development, they should be used to do so. I will now move on to some of the key issues. In relation to the principle of residential development, the application site is unallocated and comprises previously developed land. The Council's absence of a 5-year supply of immediately available housing land means that significant weight should be afforded in the determination of this planning application to the scheme's contribution to addressing the identified housing shortfall and meeting the government's objective of securing a better balance between housing demand and supply. In particular, it is considered that significant weight should be attached to the contribution towards affordable housing provision in the borough. The scheme has been designed to make the most effective use of the site by retaining a public car park on the site and seeking to add new housing to help meet housing demand. It is considered that the contemporary design of the terraced houses responds well to the Victorian terraces on Brown Street. The apartment building, in contrast, takes an individual contemporary design approach with a flat roof and the use of contrasting materials. Both buildings include attractive architectural detailing proportions and are considered to be well designed. The car park will be largely screened by the townhouses from the closest residential properties on Brown Street. In this regard, it is considered that the proposed development complies with core strategy policy L7 and design policies in the MPPF. Since the publication of the main report, the applicant has confirmed that the proposed external material to the car park deck enclosure along the northern and eastern boundaries of the building will comprise aluminium rectangular box section in a suggested bronze finish. The original submitted details proposed a galvanised finish. A specific condition has been attached to ensure that the details of the fin and a sample of the material is approved by officers. This will ensure that the local planning authority have control over the final detail of the material and to ensure that it has a non-reflective appearance. In terms of impacts on heritage assets, the analysis set out in the officer report on pages 59 to 71 has been undertaken having due regard to relevant legislation and national policy guidance and giving considerable importance and weight to the preservation of the setting of the listed buildings and the conservation area. It also gives due regard to the significance of the heritage assets as required by MPPF. It concludes that less than substantial harm would arise to the significance of a number of designated heritage assets, including Hale Station Conservation Area and the identified Grade 2 listed buildings. There would be harm to the architectural and historic significance of these heritage assets from visual intrusion in the wider townscape. Nevertheless, a number of public benefits arise from the scheme, which are considered to demonstrably outweigh that less than substantial harm. The potential impacts of the scheme on the amenity of existing residents living close to the site have been carefully considered, and the conclusion reached that the proposed development will not result in such a level of harm where a refusal of planning permission would be justified. The analysis has considered potential impacts in relation to the height, scale, and proximity of the proposed buildings to existing houses and the potential impact from parking pressures, noise, and lighting. The scheme is considered to be compliant with the MPPF and core strategy policy in this respect. In relation to highway and parking issues, these matters are covered in detail on pages 79 to 88 of the officer report. The existing car park has 80 car spaces, which includes 2 accessible spaces. For the avoidance of doubt, the proposed car park will provide 67 car parking spaces, 10 of which will be allocated as a second parking space to the proposed townhouses. The remaining 57 car parking spaces will be available for public use, and these include 4 electrical vehicle charging points and 4 disabled parking spaces. In the interest of sustainability, the car park also provides 12 cycle parking spaces for the apartments, 18 public cycle parking spaces, and space for motorcycle parking. It is acknowledged that the scheme does not provide any parking spaces for the proposed apartments. The proposal to move the access to the car park also requires the introduction of traffic calming measures along Brown Street in order to achieve the necessary sightlines. Officers are satisfied that given the sustainable location of the site, the parking provision for the residential units is adequate. The applicant has advised that the occupants of the apartments would not be eligible for parking permits, whilst it is considered that there will still be adequate parking provision to serve the district centre as a whole. In this regard, concerns raised about the impact of the development on the vitality and viability of Hale District Centre are acknowledged. However, evidence suggests that these concerns are unfounded and that there is no reasonable basis on which harm to the vitality and viability of the district centre as a result of these proposals would represent a justifiable reason for refusal of the application. In terms of equality issues, the proposed development includes the provision of 4 disabled car parking spaces and a new pedestrian path along the southern side of the site from Brown Street to the railway platform. The existing disabled access from Brown Street car park to the west side platform at the railway station will be closed during construction works. The applicant proposes to provide a temporary ramp at the station building during construction works should planning permission be granted. Network Rail have objected to the scheme as submitted regarding the proximity of the development to their boundary, and were also concerned about the temporary ramp access to the station. Network Rail do, however, have no powers to insist on a holding objection, and in any event, one of the issues they raise is not material to this application. An appropriate condition is recommended to address their concerns, as appropriate mitigation can be secured through this condition, and the NPPG recommends this approach. The development plan is the statutory starting point for decision making, and on 4 points, the development does not comply. These are in relation to housing mix, affordable housing tenure, the recycling of receipts from shared ownership properties, and heritage assets. There are, however, material considerations that justify the departures from the development plan in this case, including that the relevant development plan policies are out of date, and the NPPF is an important material consideration which would support approval of the application. The scheme delivers a number of significant benefits, including bringing forward an appropriate form of development for the site, making efficient use of land in a sustainable location close to public transport links, contributing to the council's housing land supply, and providing a percentage of affordable housing on site in excess of normal policy requirements. The tilted balance at paragraph 11 of the NPPF is engaged, i.e. planning permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the NPPF taken as a whole. The benefits the scheme can deliver and considered to significantly and demonstrably outweigh those adverse impacts, and as such, the application is recommended for approval. A number of the conditions have been updated or amended, included to secure an appropriate temporary disabled access to the station, alternative parking for the disabled and permit holders during the construction period. The construction management plan now requires a resident engagement plan, as well as further details of materials being required for part of the car park elevation. Finally, it should be noted that the council owns the land to which this planning application relates. Whilst the council is a development partner in the proposed scheme, it is not however, the applicant. The council's role as local planning authority in the determination of planning applications, and as a landowner with powers to utilise its land holdings in whatever way it feels appropriate within the confines of the law, are entirely separate. The council's decision to develop this land, including the tendering process by which the applicant was appointed, is not material to the determination of this planning application and should not carry any weight in decision making. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Coley. We have a number of speakers to the Brown Street car park application. I'm going to ask the councillor speaking against the application to begin. Councillor Young, Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Haddad. Does anybody want to go first? Councillor Mitchell? Sorry, Councillor Young, say that again.
Could Mr. Groves from the
council would like the person speaking on behalf of the residents to speak first, if that's okay.
Is that all right?
Thank you. And that is, we've got Justin Cove.
No, Chairman. No. John Groves.
John Groves. If you just hang on, Mr. Groves. If you have 3 minutes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Apologise for the voice, but thank you for the opportunity to speak and for taking into account all the information that you have before you. Your planning officers and their legal advisors have demonstrated considerable skill in attempting to find justification for an obviously flawed proposal for the sake of corporate aspirations of the council. The weaknesses of the proposal, however, cannot be disguised. You are correctly advised to consider the planning balance, weighing harm against public benefit. In this case, the acknowledged harm, including the conclusion of your own officer that there is moderate harm to the heritage assets, must show that there is a clear and convincing benefit which balances the harm to those heritage assets and other issues. Your officers offer new housing, an exemplary design, and a new car park as the benefits which make the scheme so special that any harm is outweighed. We agree that new housing is good, but not at all costs. The Council's housing strategy tells us that 2,261 new dwellings received planning permission in the first 3 quarters of 17/18. You do not necessarily have to accept every new housing development, irrespective of quality, to accept every new housing development, irrespective of quality. 400 plus objections disagree that there is anything exemplary about the design in the context of its proposed location on Brown Street. The development is massively out of proportion to the existing 2-story dwellings. This is a scheme for a city centre, not an attractive suburb. The car park reduces the number of spaces in Hale District Centre. The car park would not have enough spaces to meet the peak requirements identified in the latest council survey and would inevitably impact on centre users. Some of the spaces are unusable, and the car park creates many dark corners and spaces out of public view. Parking provision for the scheme works on the basis that the apartment owners would be banned from having a car. Not only are the possible benefits overstated, but there are a number of areas of harm resulting from the development. We say that the impact and harm of the development on heritage assets is more significant than you are advised, particularly the relationship of a 4-story apartment building on the gateway to the conservation area and next to the station buildings. The development fails to meet a number of your council's own standards for the protection of amenity. And I have to say that in 35 years as a town planner, I struggle to recall a development which so dominates the space in which it is to be placed and so poorly relates to its neighbours. A domestic extension which resulted in the same relationships as this development would be refused. We've provided you with a statement which shows, in particular, the categoric failure of the development to meet recognised standards for the provision of disabled residents and car park users. Highways arrangements only work if the council introduces traffic calming to Brown Street.
If you'd like to wrap up, Mr. Grove. Thank you, Mr. Grove. If you'd like to return to your seat. And Councillor Mitchell, are you going to go first? Yes, please. You have 5 minutes. Would you like to take a seat? Are you going to speak from there? Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry, I thought it had already. Members, thank you for the opportunity to address you on this particular application. Together with my fellow ward members, I will attempt to reflect the concerns of nearly 400 objectors of this scheme. We are disappointed that a council-led scheme on council land and financially supported by the council has conceded on so many points of planning policy, guidance and standards. The officer report guides you to in terms of how to assess the impact of the development on the conservation and the listed station bound buildings. The council's heritage officer, although not quoted in this report, has already said that the development does considerable harm to the heritage. We say that this, when properly assessed, this harm is significant. In such cases, it becomes necessary for the developer to show that any harm caused by the development is convincingly and substantially outweighs the public benefit of the scheme. We say quite simply that the development does not deliver any real benefit, certainly not enough to justify acceptance of a massive four-story structure, which fills almost every part of the site. So much so that the Network Rail are worried about how it will maintain and without access to the railway. We would ask you to challenge officers to justify and demonstrate to you how a poorly designed car park with poor access and a massive overdevelopment of the site can possibly be acceptable when assessed against national and local standards. The car arc ramp is just 2 meters from the south-facing elevation of Belgravia House. The main building is just 11 meters away. The windows of the elevation include habitable room windows, notwithstanding considerable of partial obscure glazing. With this relationship falls far short of normally applied standards. Bear in mind, the access ramp serves the public car park, not a parking area for townhouses. The building will bear no relationship to the existing houses of Brown Street. It will loom over their properties across a narrow gap of just 13 meters. The applicant and the officer's reports ask you to accept this form of development by suggesting that a relationship is typical of the area and is not clearly not like the area. There are buildings of 3 stories on Brown Street, but unlike the proposal, they are set back from the highway. The proposal here is just 1.5 meters from the back edge of the footpath. This is a large city centre scale of development, not appropriate scaled scheme in an attractive residual suburb and next to such wonderful listed buildings in a conservation area. Thank you.
Councillor Young or Councillor Haddad? Councillor Haddad.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Chair members, thank you for the opportunity to raise the concerns of a large number of my constituents relating to this planning proposal. A proposal driven by the council should surely be seeking to demonstrate best practice and comply with council policy and planning criteria. The proposal completely fails these tests. Of great concern is the apparent lack of proper consideration to the needs of disabled residents. I believe you will have seen a report from disability experts who condemned the development as being completely unfit for purpose for the disabled. Disabled residents could never live in these apartments. There is no lift, there is no designated parking, and the accessibility is substandard. The existing disabled access from the car park to the northbound platform of the railway station will now be twice the length to what is currently available, and will be via a narrow alley bonded by a concrete wall. I would ask you to challenge the developer and officers as to how this can be justified. An initial report from a highways officer raised a long list of problems with the development. Loss of parking, poor access to the proposed car park, the lack of adequate visibility when exiting, the short drive length in front of the townhouses, the obstruction of visibility by bins, no designated parking for 12 apartments, which ordinarily would require 15 spaces. A subsequent report by the highways manager chooses to disregard these issues, or alternatively seek convoluted methods to try and resolve some concerns. We would ask you to question why it can be acceptable to compromise on so many highway safety concerns, which in any other case would lead to refusal. Officers expressed their concern about car headlights shining across the railway tracks into the bedrooms of houses opposite. The officer's report does not mention the egress from the new car park is directly opposite residential properties, and car headlights will shine directly into the properties every time a vehicle leaves the car park when dark. Their front windows are only 11.5 metres from the car park. Officers accept that design standards for visibility can never be met with this scheme. The solution is to introduce traffic calming measures by installing speed bumps to slow cars down to justify the substandard visibility display. No other developer would be allowed to do this, so why can the council? In any event, the introduction of speed bumps would require a traffic regulation order, which can be defeated by residents' objections. The scheme now depends on illegal use of handheld remote control garage door openers to enable homeowners to access their garages safely. The use of handheld electronic equipment by a driver of a vehicle is, as everyone knows, illegal, and the proposed roller shutter doors are incredibly slow, leaving cars stationary in the road. Again, any other development suggesting such compromises would warrant a refusal. The scheme depends on being able to control car ownership of the occupiers of the apartment scheme. To justify the reduction in public parking, the council simply says the apartments will have no parking spaces and residents cannot apply for permit parking anywhere in the village. However, the council acknowledges that they cannot enforce this and leave it to the housing association to control. This is surely unacceptable in planning terms, and as you have heard, excludes any disabled person from buying one of these apartments. The council previously said the apartment could apply for permit parking, but to make the development work, have removed the right. It is questionable whether this is can be lawfully enforced. The development is substandard in highway terms and requires so many compromises to meet safety standards that it should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me speak, Mr. Chairman. This development is recommended for approval despite overwhelming public opposition. Both the residents and the business community in Hale, whose livelihood depends on people coming into the village, believe that this will be a huge loss of amenity to the whole population in the area. We have had around 350 objections to this application, and some 200 of them make this point. The original development proposals tendered by the council envisaged 10 houses and the retention of the 80-space car park. This development has doubled the number of dwellings with the addition of a block of 12 apartments and has almost halved the number of car park spaces available to the public. Brown Street has historically been well used by residents and was previously full to capacity before the unfortunate increase in parking charges led to a decrease in use. The applicants have submitted a parking survey which does not reflect the true position, as it quotes average usage and not peak usage. It takes no account of the decrease in use due to parking charges and the consequent closure of nearby businesses. Google Images in 2017 clearly show that then the car park was full. And I would ask you to question officers as to why they are so dismissive that increasing charging reduces demand. The officer's report says that there are no further plans to increase parking charges, but members will know that charges are due to increase in 2019 and to be extended to 8 p.m. at night in 2020. Unlike other districts within Trafford, Hale Village has no free parking available, and this has a huge impact on the village's vitality and viability. The car park survey shows that even with decreased demand, the new car park will be too small to accommodate the current peak periods of use. There's no mention in the officer's report of the 40 business permits that have been issued, or indeed the 304 residential permits that are eligible to use the car park. The design is awful. Too many nooks and crannies, and a number of spaces which will be almost impossible to get in and out of. Some diagrams show this will only be possible for cars with no wing mirrors. Officers acknowledge that some spaces can only be accessed by multiple maneuvers. We are concerned that the loss of public parking threatens the viability of Hale District Centre. We have challenged officers to disprove our concern that loss of public parking is one reason for the current unprecedented vacancy of retail and hospitality units in Hale. The applicants have produced a survey which shows that 11% of units are currently vacant. Most of these have closed in the last 12 months since the parking charges were increased. One more shop is initiating a closing down sale on Monday and will be closed by the end of this month. The data provided by the applicant shows that there has been a 300% increase in vacant business space since 2007. As ward councillors, we are in constant and close contact with our business constituents and our residents. We know from businesses facing closure that availability of car parking is a major factor in relocation or closure. The creation of a car park with considerably fewer spaces, less convenient and more expensive to use, will not reverse this trend and will continue to have an adverse impact on the viability and vitality of Hale Village. Clearly, the perceived benefits of this development proposal simply do not outweigh the harm that this development will cause. What Hale desperately needs is a strategic plan to ensure social and economic growth, as its livelihood depends on people coming into the village to make use of its amenities. This development will not help, and it should be refused. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Speaking in favour of the application, I've got Justin Cove and I've got Councillor Wright. Who would like to go first? Mr. Cove. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Cove. Just before you start, Ms. Coley is going to make some comments. Thank you, Ms. Coley.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to clarify a couple of the points made by the the various speakers in objection to the scheme, matters of fact mainly. The point was raised that our Heritage Development Officer commented in her consultation response that there would be considerable harm to the conservation area and the listed buildings. That is not correct. She did not make that comment. She analysed it as a moderate level of harm and less than substantial, as is reported in the officer report. And the heritage section in the officer report incorporates her consultation response and comments. I would also like to make the point that there would be a lift in the apartments. We acknowledge not in the townhouses, and we acknowledge there's some criticism in an objection on that basis, but there would be a lift in the apartments. The matter of planning permission being granted for over 2,000 dwellings, that's acknowledged, but the council's housing land supply situation does remain at around 3 years. So the situation as set out in the officer report, the great wait to housing delivery, that is the correct test. The issue around an original scheme of 10 dwellings and 80 car parking spaces is not material. The scheme before you this evening is the one for you to consider whether it's acceptable or not. Also, any change in car parking demand in Hale that's taken place in the past is not material. You consider the position today and the impact of this development on the position as it is today and the car park capacity as it is today. And I'd also just like to point out that there was also an incorrect statement made about no free parking in Hale. There's a considerable amount of free parking on street in Hale, 2 hours. You can park for free, and then the pay and display car parks. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Cole would like to switch your microphone on. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Firstly, we welcome the officer's recommendation to approve the scheme. The report to committee provides a clear and logical assessment of the proposals, fully justifying the conclusion to recommend approval. The scheme will be delivered by Novo Property Group, who are a local developer whose contribution to the regeneration of the area has been significant in recent years, successfully delivering attractive new build properties and period conversions in Altrincham town centre. They currently have a pipeline of around 100 new homes spread across Altrincham, Hale and Bowden, focused mainly around smaller units, fulfilling a recognised demand and giving more people the opportunity to live and to work in the area. This commitment extends to providing affordable housing, which is particularly visible in this scheme, comprising 55% of the total, which will be administered and managed by Southway Housing Trust under its remit to provide affordable housing in the area. Novo has a high street office in Altrincham, which puts their team in close contact with the community and its feedback on all of their projects. In relation to this scheme in particular, Novo held 6 hours of community engagement over 2 events with Hale residents, sending communications via 250 letter drafts, as well as social media postings. Novo and its project team has proactively considered all concerns and questions raised throughout the process, and as a result, the following changes have been made. The height of both the apartment building and townhouses have been reduced, and the massing diminished adjacent to Belgravia House. The design of the eastern elevation has been amended to improve its appearance when viewed from Hale Station Conservation Area. The window design and brickwork proposed for the apartments has also been amended, and the internal layout of and access to the car park has been redesigned, and a traffic management scheme has been proposed on Brown Street, helping to reduce car speeds, creating a safer environment for all residents. The resulting scheme has also been supported by the Traffic Conservation Officer. The significant benefits associated with the proposals include the delivery of much needed housing, particularly affordable housing, in an area where a shortfall still exists, and the economic benefits associated with housing delivery, and all this whilst retaining the existing utility of the car park for the benefit of the public. These benefits also align with the broader debate that is currently taking place in respect of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. A major criticism of the first draft was that too much land was proposed to be released from the Greenbelt. All 10 districts were then challenged to increase the density of house building on brownfield sites in urban areas, and in particular around town centres and transport hubs. The scheme at Brown Street achieves exactly this and puts Trafford in a better position to defend its Greenbelt moving forward. The overall planning balance therefore weighs firmly in favour of the proposals, and so we ask members of the Planning Committee to support the officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cove. If you'd like to return to your seat. Councillor James Wright is going to speak now. Councillor Wright, let me get his title correct. Councillor Wright is the executive member for Investment, Regeneration, Strategic Planning, and asked me specifically if he could speak to this item. He's not a local ward councillor, but I think it's important that we hear what he has to say. Councillor Wright, would you like to take a seat over there, or would you like to speak from? You'll stay where you are. You have 5 minutes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving me the time to speak in favour of this development. This is a fantastic scheme which will not only provide valuable housing stock to our borough, which we all know is in small supply, but will also provide affordable housing in one of the most unaffordable parts of not just Trafford, but the whole of the UK. The council has been conducting borough-wide assessments of existing assets to ensure they are meeting their potential in terms of utility, social and economic benefits. As part of this, the Brown Street car park was identified as an underutilised car park in a poor condition without an improvement case for investment. Star Procurement administered a thorough tender process requesting schemes that would most closely fulfil the challenging remit defined by the council for the site, that of maximising its utility and revenue generating capabilities whilst retaining car parking. This resulted in the appointment of Novo Property Group and CP UK to progress to the scheme being proposed today. The result is a scheme that has been designed to an extremely high standard and manages to achieve an impressive array of benefits with very little impact on the existing utility of the site. I think this has been an exemplary process, promising the improvement and retention of a community asset whilst providing much needed housing with an emphasis on affordability. I've seen comments that local businesses will be adversely affected by the proposals, but I see no evidence to support this. The focus appears to be on the availability of parking. Trafford Council's parking services conducted a Hale-wide parking survey over 2 weeks in September and October. The results concluded that parking in Hale had ample capacity. The Brown Street car park, even with a 10% tolerance, was less than 50% utilised. In practical terms, this showed that out of the 80 existing spaces, only 37 were used on a daily basis at any one time. This scheme delivers 57 public spaces, well in excess of the number that were ever being used on the current site. What the proposals actually do is introduce new residents to the area who will be able to access the numerous shops and services available in Hale within a short walking distance, and so their custom will actually help to support the viability of local business through increased spending and patronage of other local services such as public transport. Jobs will also be created through the construction process for local tradespeople. I strongly believe this development should be approved based on its own merits as demonstrated by the carefully considered recommendation of the planners. However, I urge the committee to reflect on the broader questions that this proposal forces us to consider. Hale is a wonderful part of our borough with an incredible heritage and fantastic facilities. With this comes demand for homes. Due to Hale's popularity, it has become for too many an unaffordable place to buy or even rent a home. This scheme will not solve that issue in one hit, but it will provide affordable housing for people on lower incomes at affordable deposit levels. People who wouldn't otherwise be able to get themselves onto the housing market. The scheme will also build market sale properties that will provide the necessary funds to enable us to provide the affordable homes we so desperately need. The affordability index in Trafford puts the average income to property ratio at 8.3. That's 8.3 times the average salary. This is an unsustainable situation that we have to change. Building a scheme of homes on this site begins that process. 55% of this scheme will be affordable housing, well above the current requirement of 40% in this ward. Trafford is the only borough, not just in Greater Manchester, but in the whole of the North West, that has such an affordability pressure on its housing market that it qualifies for preferential access for both the government's recently announced Home Building Fund and the Housing Infrastructure Fund. There have been a lot of numbers discussed by me this evening in relation to homes. However, the only real number that counts is how many members vote for this scheme and allow for a development of homes that will not just give people in Trafford the opportunities to own an affordable home, but will also add to our housing supply. Without development on sites such as this, a brownfield site in a poor state of repair, the demand on us to encroach onto our greenbelt would significantly increase. Refusing this application would not only stop our young people and families from potentially buying an affordable home, it will further damage our ability as an authority in resisting developments on our green and open spaces. Something that, as a member of this council, I want us to protect as much as we can, notwithstanding the balance that has to be struck in achieving our housing supply targets. I'll finish with this. Do we really value the 23 unused parking spaces, above £6 million of investment into the village, with 22 new homes where people can live? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Okay, so I'm going to ask the committee to move to the debate. Councillor Wetton, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Chairman. Some very interesting points made in all of the speeches that we've just heard, and clearly this is a very big, in its own right, a very big scheme, and one that would likely have a very big impact on the site it would occupy. I would say that generally I am supportive of innovative projects, especially ones that deliver for the community, and more so if they deliver housing for the community. I like projects that turn a problem into an opportunity, and I usually like to see mixed developments, ones that make a site work harder and deliver more. And when I looked at the introduction of this application, I wanted to see such aspects within it. But I fear that within this application, ambition has overtaken the practicalities. Even having made my previous remarks, I can't sign up to a concept that welds together a two-storey car park and townhouses. I think that multi-level car parks go with venues like shopping malls and event venues. And whilst I'll accept that apartment buildings can feature parking at basement level, I see this design that's before us today as very different. The design itself, it may be innovative, but for me, it comes across as incongruous. A car park like that does not sit well backed onto townhouses. And I worry, in fact, that if it were to come about, that such a design, in trying to be multi-serving, will actually harbour devils in the detail. I just can imagine that the car park cannot sit well next to townhouses all as one structure. The massing for me is overbearing. The more I look at it, the displays that we keep seeing up on the screen there, the more I feel that it is just not the right project for that location. It's asking too much of the site. And I hear what Councillor Wright said about the value of housing, and I think my record on this committee will show that I am very, very supportive of housing projects. But there's a balance with everything. And I think with this one, the balance has gone wrong somehow. It's just trying to get too much onto that site to try and meet all of the requirements of all of the different stakeholders within it, including delivering financial reward for some, including delivering homes, including delivering the parking. It's a good intention to try to set out to try and meet everything. But I think this intention has gone wrong in terms of the design, and as a result, it's totally out of proportion, and I think it will blight Hale itself. In terms of the representations that we've had reported to us, I doubt in my time on the committee, on this committee, I have known an application generate quite so many, and such a strong wave of opposition to an application. I mean, even in this report, the synopsis of the representations runs to over 6 pages, and that doesn't include the councillors' representations. So there's a huge strength of feeling demonstrated to us in a number of ways, and I'm not really picking out so many voices in support, except for the applicant and, in effect, the council. I think maybe the council could have perhaps done a little bit more in trying to amend this proposal in order to make it a more acceptable project for the location that it's planned for. A lot has been said to us tonight about the adverse highways aspects, and I won't rehearse those, but clearly there are many elements within that show, once again, to enhance the point that I was making, that this project is trying to do too much, trying to deliver too much, and in so doing, it's corrupted its initial intentions and produced something that actually doesn't deliver at all well for far too many people who will be affected by it. So with those concerns, Chairman, much as I like to see developments that bring housing into Trafford and bring a range of housing opportunities into Trafford, I don't believe that this is the right scheme for this site. I think that a far better scheme that includes housing would be achievable on this site, but I don't think this is the one. Thank you, Chairman. So I will formally move that we refuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wetton. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. When I first heard about this scheme and the fact that we're going to put some housing in this area, it seemed like an interesting idea. And I was hoping that I was going to be able to support it, because I thought it is an area that requires additional housing. It is an area that requires affordable housing. Unfortunately, as I got the planning papers and read them and attended the briefing that was provided and carried out my site visit, my initial positive feelings started to ebb away. And I'm going to broadly agree with the assessment that has just been delivered by my colleague, Councillor Wetton. I do think it is, there are numerous factors along with that, and I'm not going to rehearse and repeat all the speech that's just been made, but I do agree that this is constituting both overdevelopment and out of character development. It is a very large development that has sought to make maximum use of the site, and there's nothing wrong in making maximum use of the site. But I think in this case we have maybe tipped over the balance and gone too far. I appreciate what Councillor White had to say about trying to defend Greenbelt by making maximum use out of brownfield sites, and I agree with that objective. But I think in this case we have gone beyond that which is reasonable. I don't think that this is a site that needs to necessarily remain as it is. As you said, it is perhaps underused. When I attended today, although I must admit, when I did attend today, there weren't very many car parking spaces when I turned up this afternoon to have a look at this site today. And so I do feel that we do have a problem in terms, not only in terms of the massing, but also the nature of the building. They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. but I'm not sure how many people will find this beautiful, especially given its location and its context and the fact that it's right next to listed buildings and what have you. So I do have those concerns. Plus, as I say, I do have concerns regarding the level of parking. I've listened to the argument that Council Wright has put forward, that it's underutilised. As I say, when I've turned up to it, it isn't utilised. I've also heard the comments that there is other parking in Hale. Well, I've tried to park in Hale on numerous occasions and ended up driving around for 20 minutes, half an hour trying to find space. So it's on the times when I've been to Hale, although I don't go that frequently, I must admit, on the times when I have been in the past, I've not found it that easy to park. So the idea that the parking reducing it further will have an impact upon the vitality of that town centre. So for those reasons and the reasons put forward by Councillor Wetton already, which I'm in full agreement with, I will be seconding the proposal that has been made by Councillor Wetton, i.e. to overturn officer recommendation and refuse this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Patel.
Thank you. I'd like to open by acknowledging the level of opposition from residents here this evening and from those of the elected members who have represented their constituents' concerns very well. It's a very comprehensive report. I'd like to thank officers for producing it. I'd like to, I reject the unfair inference tonight by some that sections of this report are inaccurate, misleading or driven by commercial gains by the council. I just wanted to acknowledge that. In terms of design and the use of the space, I'm going to go against the grain here and say actually it's very cleverly designed, and in engineering terms it's quite exciting use of space. Certainly it is it's to the maximum developed, if that's the right phrase, but it's what we'd want to see from brownfield sites here. The affordable element, I mean, it is an amazing offer. It's much needed and it's most welcomed. I trust the parking surveys that are summarised in these reports, but acknowledge that there will be disruption to parking in Hale during the construction of this scheme, if it goes ahead, and in the early occupation of the scheme. But I honestly believe that that will settle down and won't produce a long-term detrimental impact on residents. So against what's already been said, I'm in support of this scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. Councillor Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. Like the rest of my colleagues around the table, always welcome the development of new homes. It's always very exciting to see a proposal come in, particularly in Hale, in the south of the borough, where we know housing is expensive. It'd be wonderful to have more affordable housing in that part of the borough. However, I think the fact that we have so many residents opposed to the application, and all three ward councillors who know the ward far better than other ward councillors who don't represent the ward, I think that is really raising a massive red flag. But as we know as members of planning committee, just because there's a level of opposition doesn't mean that an application shouldn't be approved. So when I actually drove down Brown Street today, I went with a very, very open mind. But as I turned the corner and I saw that car parking space and imagined the new apartments and the townhouses, I thought that it would not do. It's already a very, very narrow road. It's a lovely road, but it's a very, very narrow road. And it already has a feeling of being quite close and quite tight. And I think the fact that there is that openness of the car park for the moment, obviously there could be another development at some point, but the actual overbearingness of that new application, if it was to actually go ahead, I think it would completely close in the road. I think it's overbearing. I think it spoils the street scene. And for that reason alone, apart from all the facts that the residents and ward councillors have brought up tonight, the overbearing nature of the application means I won't be supporting the application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barclay. Councillor Coggins.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, like others have said, I was struck by the amount of concern from residents, local businesses, community groups, councillors, and it's really been remarkable how many objections there have been to this. So I have really given it very serious consideration. like many areas, it seems to be, experiencing a huge amount of stress caused by parking, and the 4B streets and the surrounding area seem to be really struggling. I'm also concerned about the massing and shadowing, particularly at Belgravia, although there are considerations in the report that do explain that those windows were in a way expected to perhaps have some sort of overshadowing in the future. I did have concerns about disabled access, and at the briefing last week, I did ask about how we would be losing 2 disabled parking spaces during the construction phase, and I'm pleased to see that the additional info report tonight has said that they've been able to replace those with spaces on the Victoria Road side, so that's good news. But of course, in planning, we're restricted to the issues the planning law tells us we have to consider, but planning law also tells us about the weight we have to give to them. And balancing against all that, we've got the fact that all the data and research on the surveys on parking seems to indicate under occupancy. And Councillor Mrs. Young did mention tonight that, there was previously full occupancy, but it has reduced. And then, of course, crucially, against all this, we finally have the issue of the affordable parking. And again, in paragraph 220, it does tell us that the affordable housing has to be given significant weight in this. And, we sit here month after month looking at applications that are supposed to have 20, 30, 40% affordable housing, and they don't. And this one has 55%, which is really remarkable. And Councillor Wright has given us some really stark statistics about the chances of young people in this area being able to ever buy their own home. And so for me at the moment, I'm finding that the presence of this massive amount of desperately needed affordable housing is perhaps tilting the balance very slightly in favour. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coggins. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to start by thanking Councillors Young, Mitchell, Haddad and Wright for their representations, as well as the efforts that have been made by Mr. Groves and Mr. Cove this evening. I think it's only right that we acknowledge from the get-go that there's been a huge amount of public opposition to parts of the development that are before us this evening. And over the course of the last week, I took the steps of trying to understand that opposition and decided to look through the individual representations that have been made and uploaded onto Trafford Council's website. I think by reading through about representation number 50, it was clear that the loss of the Brown Street car park facility was a massive concern. So I suppose what's the task before us this evening is to try and interrogate the veracity of the concerns that have been raised by members of the public. And I have to say, I think that paragraphs 147 through to 153 of the report, in particular paragraphs 147 and 148, which refer to the survey that's been conducted by the council, I think that they've really tried to drill down into the concerns around the car parking facility. And the report does indicate that the survey evidence documents that the car park's rarely full to capacity. I think we need to bear that in mind. Anecdotally, as somebody who grew up in Hale and still has close family living just outside of Hale Village, I've never known that car park to be at full capacity and not anywhere near a regular basis. So when considering that, I have to say I don't think that we should put undue emphasis on the objections that have been raised about the loss of what is only 23 car parking spaces. However, I think more than just the matter of car parking has been raised. The report, as well as the solicitor's letter that was circulated to members, talks about the matter of affordable housing. And I share some of those concerns about the fact that the affordable housing offer only relates to shared ownership. However, I don't think that's a matter for our planning department. I think that really that's an issue that a huge amount of registered providers of social housing have to consider for themselves. And in this case, Southway Housing Trust need to ask themselves why they're only prepared to offer shared ownership as opposed to units that are available for rent, be that affordable rent or social rent. I think that Mr. Groves characterised the application as dominating the space of the site, if I recall correctly. And I have to say, I can appreciate the concerns that relate to the scale of this development. I visited the site just the other day to try and refamiliarise myself with it, and I walked through Hale Town Centre. And I can understand, when you look at the terraces on Brown Street, why people might look at this application and think that it would dominate the space, as Mr. Groves has said. Initially, I approached this application with sort of cautious optimism, but I've listened to and reflected on the representations that have been made by other members here tonight, by members of the public. And I have to say, I think a huge amount of work's been invested in this application. Councillor Coggins has already referred to sort of the small and practical steps that have been taken to try and find workable solutions to some of the problems, specifically around disability access. I think it's really important that we acknowledge we've got a willing partner in Southway Housing Trust to develop some affordable housing in one of the most unaffordable parts of the borough. And what I would say is, and I acknowledge that it's already been moved and seconded that we refuse the application, I'd be much more interested in us deferring the application to allow officers to try and find a more workable application that meets the needs of everybody that has made up representations regarding the proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Longden.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I, again, like other councillors this evening, I want to thank everybody for the representations that they have made. And it is obviously an incredibly difficult decision that's put before us in terms of the number of objections from the local community. I think, having reflected on it, the issue of affordable housing for me is the most relevant, and it will ultimately, I think, sway how I vote on this. When we consider the huge increase in house prices in recent years, and the comments that people have made already about the out-and-out unaffordability of young families who would like to reside in Hale. Now, I am a Hale resident, and I do know Hale very well. I use the area on a weekly and daily basis, and I have young men in my family who love the area that they have been raised in. I have one at university who hopefully will graduate in a few years' time, hopefully in a well-paid profession. He will struggle, if at all, to be able to afford housing in that area. And I think these types of initiatives allow the next generation to actually consider putting their roots in the areas that they were brought up in and they love. So I think we do need to put a lot of weight on affordable housing. In terms of aesthetics, quite frankly, yes, it is very much a personal opinion. I do not have an issue with the pictures I've seen today and the others that I've studied. I think there was one view looking down the street, it looks very pleasant, actually. It's a personal thing. I think the fact that this is a brownfield site is superb, that we're using brownfield site, which, is not a particularly attractive site as it is. And as I said before, I quite like the look of those housing. I appreciate that they are larger compared to other housing on the street, but it doesn't come across to me as particularly overbearing. With regards to the car parking, clearly the evidence is before us. It's significantly underutilized. I don't see a problem with it being double-storied. I can't see how that creates difficulties. Looking at the entrances to and from the car park, I can see how there might be some disturbance in terms of headlights, and I do obviously sympathise with residents with regard to that. But people are talking about overbearing flats, overbearing the road. Well, there are flats already in Hale Centre. If we go to the other side of the crossing, there are flats with several stories. I've never particularly thought they're overbearing, and they're right on the edge of the railway track. So I think we have to put this into context and look at the bigger picture. For me, the affordable housing for the next generation of the existing residents is paramount, and that, I think, will be swaying me in my vote, although I do very much appreciate and would like to explore further the recommendation of Councillor Williams to see if we can make any further adaptations to this planning application to make it more agreeable to all concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Longden. Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start by saying that I'm not opposed to development on this site, and I get the arguments that the car park currently is underutilised. And I agree with what it says in the officer report, where it says that the current appearance and the use of Brown Street does little to enhance the character and appearance of the area. I also understand that there's a need for new housing, particularly affordable housing, but this should not be at any cost. And I feel that these plans, this development is in its current form excessive in scale for a plot of its size. And I agree fully with what Councillor Mitchell said and Mr. Grove said, that this type of development is more akin to a city centre than to Hale Village. 4-storey townhouses, which will be constructed right up to Brown Street, right up to the pavement in Brown Street, are completely out of keeping with the properties opposite. And that's before we even talk about the apartment block, which I think is also completely out of context with the area. Councillor Bunting, Councillor Wetton and Councillor Barclay have all made some very good points, and all previous speakers have acknowledged the level of opposition that we've seen here, not least from the 3 ward councillors, but also from several hundred residents. Car parking is one of the main issues that's been raised, and I'm particularly concerned about the lack of parking for the apartments. Namely, why will permits, this is a residence permit area, why will permits not be allowed to apartment owners? The report quotes the 2011 census and says that 38% of people living in Hale don't have a car. Well, this is 7 years ago, and things have changed an awful lot with regards to car usage, and they're continuing to change. The streets surrounding this area always have been very rammed. They are terraced houses. They were built before people had cars. Most of these, it's an affluent area. A lot of these houses have 2 or 3 cars per house. So it's already incredibly busy around there. I get what Councillor Wright is saying about wanting to see more affordable homes. I did his job up until 7 months ago, so I'm fully aware of the affordability issues of South Trafford. But in this context, in this development, I believe these plans are overdevelopment and out of keeping. As I've said, I'm not opposed to development on this site. I'd actually love to see this entire site as affordable housing. It would be an absolute brilliant place to put affordable housing. But I think that we'd have to see a reduction in the size in order to see a reduction in the size and scale of this development. It does provide a great opportunity, but the current proposals squander this opportunity. I think it's just a bit too much. And I'd actually support what Councillor Williams said earlier. Maybe we could go back to the drawing board with this. Maybe we could go back and scale down this development, but keep that affordability percentage. I think it's 54% affordable housing. That's absolutely brilliant. But let's scale the proposals down. Let's go back to the drawing board, have another look at this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hobbs. Councillor Evans.
I think the committee will probably appreciate being uncommonly quiet on this one. I'm truly torn. When I first saw it come to paper, I was 100% for it. And it is purely the weight of the public opinion and the representations. I live in Hale, as most people probably know. I live in Hale. I park in Hale every single day. And I compare this very similarly, parking-wise, to the Timperley Library project, which has lost quite a number of parking spaces. But I don't accept that it's lost too many parking spaces, because I believe the parking studies. But I cannot possibly disregard the resident that I've never seen so many objections to anything. So I am truly torn and still haven't made my mind up.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Ms Cole is going to make a comment, please.
Yes, if I could just remind members of the committee that the number of objections is not material. It is what those objections say and what the issues that those objections raise, not simply the number we've received. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Ijaz Malik.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Ms. Coley. You just said that. I was going to say that. Obviously, I have got all the sympathy with 300 objectors, but objections, we only take what is relevant to the planning issues. I don't see any planning concern. I know that the site is a bit tight, but I think this development fits in the site very well. And as we had a good debate, we have heard everything about affordable housing and things like this. Mrs. Young did mention about closing of the businesses there. I think we have got 22 houses plus apartments, people will be coming in and they should boost the business. So I think we have got an advantage by having this development at this site. So I will go for the approval that we recommend this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Malik. Councillor Bunting would like to speak again.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just I agree with as the comments have been made already that this site, and I made it myself earlier, that this site is not irredeemable in terms of a planning site, be a successful outcome for this site. I just really don't think that we've got there yet. And just in terms of the comments made by your Vice Chairman in terms of deferring, sure, I was simply going to say, Chairman, the better outcome surely will be if, as we have on various other sites that spring to mind, where we have refused initially, then a relatively short while later, a second plan has come back, which this committee has been more than happy to accept. So refusing and then allowing them to resubmit. I'm thinking one that sticks in my head was one brought the Council of Bulletin some time ago on Hope Road, where they brought a wholly inappropriate plan to us. We refused it. The next planning application, next planning meeting, or maybe next but one, a new plan arrived. Wholly acceptable, fine. Why didn't you do that the first time round was the main thought in the room, and we accepted it. I also remember Councillor Mrs Evans being a very similar one in Hale, where an initial monolithic plan was brought before us. We refused it, and then lo and behold, a short while later, a far better plan arrived, and we were more than happy to accept it. So I'd simply say on this case that this is not irredeemable. We can get a good development on this site, one that will serve the needs of both the people of Hale who live there at the moment and also those people who need housing within Hale. But I think the best thing to do in terms of the suggestion of deferral is, rather than deferring it, simply refuse and allow them to resubmit. That's what we've done on numerous occasions before, and we've often had a good outcome the second time round. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Any councillors who haven't spoken, would they like to speak? Councillor Stennett.
The issue of affordable housing is very important, but with the concerns expressed by so many residents this evening, I am mindful in terms of picking up what Councillor Williams and Councillor Hobbs and certainly Councillor Bunting, hoping that we could take it back and to look at what extent we might be able to look at a better option for the in terms of this application.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. Anybody else? Councillor Carey would like to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like other people have said, when I read this, I'm really supportive of it, particularly with the social housing, the cycling points, the electricity points, its situation. What all the councillors representing the area have said, though, it has brought me to really struggle on it, and I'm still really thinking about it. I don't think a deferral would be any good. What Councillor Bunting has mentioned maybe is a consideration. I'm just still at a point of thinking.
Okay, I've asked everybody to speak this evening. I'm grateful for that, and so I think I have a duty to speak myself with my own comments, although I am the chair. I think what I'm picking up is a decision has got to be made. Deferral's been mentioned, but I think we're feeling now is that a decision needs to be made today. Can I say to all the residents who have made their comments that we hear what you say, and the last thing we want is to affect the vitality of Hale, particularly the councillors who know that area well. But I have looked at this report in depth, and I am absolutely supportive of it. I'm happy with the car parking. Car parking has been raised many times. We looked at it. We had a briefing for councillors last week, and it was discussed at length. And for me, the car parking survey stands up. Anecdotally, we've been in those areas and we didn't see a change in it. Now, I know people want to keep the car park to protect an interest for the vitality of Hale, but I don't think that will have such an effect on Hale. And the councillors around this table, down both sides, in fact, the whole of the council, that is the last thing we want. We want the very, very best for Hale. Affordable housing, we have not got enough of it. It's quite as simple as that. And Hale is unaffordable. This development gives us a chance for affordable housing in Hale Village. Now, I visited the site a couple of times, and we are next to the heritage asset of Hale Village, the train station, and what have you. But I think in the nature of where this development is, the boundary of Brown Street, I do not believe it will affect that heritage asset. And members around this committee will know that I am very keen on protecting our heritage assets. That is no little matter to me, and one I place great weight on, which is said as much in the planning report. I do not think it will affect the heritage asset. And when I've read it, and when I've heard what people said, and I've listened to what people have said tonight, and as other members, to listen to my view to be changed. We're here to be persuaded. Colleagues are very expert in planning, some of them a lot better than me, and I'm prepared to listen to what people have got to say. But I feel that a lot of the issues are generated from the inconvenience that this will cause, which it will cause. If this were approved this evening, it will cause a lot of inconvenience. There'll be 12 months, 18 months of a building site down there, dust and noise, which we wish wouldn't happen. But the problems that a building site causes for residents is not a reason for refusal, even in a beautiful place. And it is a beautiful place, such as Hale. So I'm going to be supporting this application. It's been moved and seconded. Has it been moved that we grant this application? I'll move. Can I move that we grant this application? I don't know if any members want to support me. We'll go to the votes. I think I've asked everybody to speak, and now we'll go to the voting. Okay, does anybody want to move, second that? Do we need to go to the refusal vote first?
We do, yes, Chairman, but I would also need some reasons for refusal from those who have proposed that motion.
Councillor Bunting.
And what harm does that cause that would warrant refusal? We need to identify that harm.
Also, the character of the area and that will have an impact on the heritage asset, i.e. the stability affecting it is completely out of character with that and is immediately imposing upon it. I also do have Sorry, Chairman, I forgot to put the microphone on. So, just to repeat myself in case people didn't hear me, the size, scale, and massing, and also the character, the character of the building and the nature of the building immediately impacts upon the character of the area and impacts upon the listed heritage asset, i.e., the Grade 2 listed building, which is literally right next to it, and that will basically have an unacceptable impact upon that heritage asset.
So the officer report identifies a level of harm already.
I believe the level of harm is higher than the level identified in the report. That's one bit where I do disagree with the officer recommendation, that they suggested that it's an acceptable level of harm. I believe the level of harm is far more substantial than is alluded to in the report.
And that the public benefits would not outweigh that harm.
I do not believe they will, no.
Okay. We need to get that right. Okay, thank you, Councillor Bunting. Okay. Is there anything else? I think we have two clear reasons for refusal there. I don't need anything else from members, but I don't want to stop you suggesting anything. Okay.
I did make the point about the inappropriateness of the abutting of townhouses onto car park, and I don't know what to.
We could incorporate that into a general concern about design and character. Okay. Do you need me to summarise those with you? Yeah. So members have identified two reasons for refusal. The first, that the size, scale and massing design of the proposals would be out of character with the surrounding area. And the second, that the harm to heritage assets identified would not be outweighed by the public benefits of the scheme, and so therefore there would be a level of harm. Thank you, Chairman.
It's been moved and seconded. It was proposed by Councillor Wetton, seconded by Councillor Bunton, that we refuse this application. All those in favour of refusal, please show. And all those against refusal, please show. We need to go to a vote for granting. All those members in favour of granting this application. Has it been seconded? Yeah. Councillor Patel seconded it. Yeah. That application has been granted. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go to page 109. That's the former Riley Snooker Club, 1D Bridgewater Road in Altrincham. We have speakers against this item. Councillor Young, Councillor Jerome and Councillor Coggins. Councillor Coggins, would you like to go first? Thank you. Before you begin, Councillor Coggins, I've just got Miss Cole is going to give us an introduction to this item.
Thank you, Chairman. This application relates to the site of a former snooker hall situated on the northern side of Bridgewater Road in Altrincham and adjacent to the Bridgewater Canal. Full planning permission is sought for the demolition of the existing snooker hall and the erection of an apartment building containing a total of 38 residential dwellings with associated parking and landscaping. The building comprises 9 one-bed apartments and 29 two-bed apartments and ranges from 3 to 6 stories in height. This is an amended scheme to that refused at the Planning and Development Management Committee of 12th of July 2018. This was refused due to its scale, massing, design and a shortfall in the level of on-site car parking provision. Letters of objection have been received from 45 addresses, with many concerns being raised in relation to highways, parking, scale and amenity issues. Following the publication of the original committee report, a further letter of objection has been received. Issues raised in this are addressed in the additional information report. The key changes from the earlier refused scheme are a reduction in the number of units proposed from 42 to 38, the reduction in height of the tallest section of the building from 7 to 6 stories, amendments to the elevation of the building fronting the canal, and the inclusion of 4 visitor car parking spaces within the site. The height of the tallest section has been reduced by 1 story, and the building is considered to be appropriate in this location in terms of its scale, massing, and detailed design. The changes to the elevation fronting the canal are still considered to be acceptable from a design perspective. It is considered that the applicant has appropriately demonstrated that there will not be an unacceptable impact on the amenity of surrounding properties. Officers are also satisfied that the proposal is acceptable in terms of noise and air quality impacts. The reduction in the number of units means 4 visitor car parking spaces can now be provided within the site. The applicant has also proposed a system whereby groups of spaces are allocated to groups of apartments and any unused spaces can be occupied by visitors to these units, thereby potentially generating increased visitor parking provision. Since the previous application was refused, additional parking surveys have been carried out at car parks serving the Budenberg and Woodfield apartment developments, together with further surveys at the Bridge apartments, alongside other supporting highways information submitted with the earlier application. All submitted evidence indicates that an appropriate level of parking is provided, particularly given the highly sustainable location of the site. Officers are also satisfied with the proposal in terms of access, cycle parking and servicing arrangements. 7 affordable housing units were originally offered under this application. This offer has increased to 8 following viability discussions. These are on-site shared ownership units, and officers are satisfied that this is the most that viably can be provided, and this represents 21% of the total number of units. Officers are satisfied with the development in all other respects, including matters of flooding and biodiversity. No objections to the application have been received from any statutory consultees. A number of public benefits arise from the proposed scheme, which are considered to demonstrably outweigh any residual harm. These are that the scheme will deliver a sustainable development, including 38 new residential units on a brownfield site, a significant contribution to the Council's housing land supply figures and targets for delivering residential development on brownfield sites. It will also deliver 8 affordable units under shared ownership and will bring about the redevelopment of an underused site. The proposal will result in an improved street scene on this part of Bridgewater Road with a high-quality, contemporary design building. The scheme will also boost the local economy both through the provision of construction jobs and also by way of new residents to the development contributing towards local shops and services. Having carried out this analysis, there is no clear reason for refusing the development proposed when considering the application against paragraph 11 of the NPPF. The tilted balance is therefore engaged, i.e. planning permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the NPPF taken as a whole. All other detailed matters have been assessed, including highway safety and residential amenity. These have been found to be acceptable, with, where appropriate, specific mitigation secured by planning condition. All relevant planning issues have been considered and representations and consultation responses taken into account in concluding that the proposals comprise an appropriate form of development for the site. Proposals are considered to be compliant with the development plan and, where this is silent or out of date, national planning policy. The development also largely complies with relevant adopted local guidance, and where it does not, the development is considered to be acceptable on its own merits for the reasons set out in the report. There are also further benefits which weigh in favour of a grant of planning permission. The application is therefore recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Coley. Councillor Coggins, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This scheme varies only very slightly from the previous application for this site, which the committee rejected a few months back. Like its predecessor, I want to argue that this scheme should be rejected because the adverse impacts would outweigh the benefits for local residents. And there's 2 particular areas I want to consider where it clashes significantly with our planning policy. Firstly, due to its scale and massing, the proposed building would constitute an overdevelopment of a small site, and this would lead to a loss of residential amenity for residents, contrary to policy L7 of the Trafford core strategy and to the advice of NPPF. This much is clear from the fact that actually the scale and massing of the building have barely changed at all since the previous submission, which was rejected partially for these reasons. Secondly, the increased level of stress on the local infrastructure caused by this development would exacerbate the existing road safety problems in the area, which would lead to a negative impact on highway safety, contrary to policies L4 and L7 of the Trafford core strategy, as well as the NPPF. And then finally, I want to look at the supposed benefits of the scheme and argue that they do not meet the needs of the local community, and so they cannot outweigh these harms. So firstly, the scale and massing. The shading of numbers 1 to 6 Emery Close was admitted in the earlier application, and this will of course remain in the new application because the border with Emery Close has not changed at all in this new proposal. Residents here have invested their time and money in their gardens, which will be starved of light, impacting on their lifestyle. So this would be an irrevocable loss of amenity to these neighbours on Emery Close. This is clearly a breach of L7.3 of the core strategy, which says the development must not prejudice the amenity of adjacent properties by overshadowing. In particular, it says, in relation to matters of amenity protection, development must, doesn't say should, it says must, be compatible with the surrounding area and not prejudice the amenity of future occupiers and or occupants of adjacent properties by reason of overbearing, overshadowing, overlooking, visual intrusion, and some other characteristics. So this overshadowing shows that the requirements of the core strategy cannot be met by a building of this size in this location. It's simply too big because of the impact it has on the family homes in Emery Close. So for these reasons, we can see that this development would cause harm to the area due to its scale and massing. Secondly, if we look at road safety, As ward councillor, I can assure you that this area is known to residents and those who use the area as one that is plagued with road safety concerns. The junction of the A56 and Navigation Road, the bridge over the canal at the A56 and Brunswick Road are all areas that have been repeatedly flagged up to us as ones where there are concerns about road safety. The high level of congestion in the area causes concern for the safety of pedestrians and cyclists, and in particular the narrow roads lead to pavement parking, which forces vulnerable road users like those with buggies or wheelchairs out into the road. And there's a serious concern that the increased traffic which this site could bring, as well as the already approved development at the depot site, would exacerbate these concerns. And we have to remember that this location is quite unique in that because of the one-way system, all access to and from it must come through the very narrow junctions on Navigation Road. And it should also be noted that this is a family area where there's a large number of children and who are particularly at risk from such increased congestion. And in addition to this, immediately opposite the site is Wharf Close, where a site which caters for residents, many of whom have mobility difficulties. So again, any reduction in road safety is a particular concern for these residents. Policy L4 of the core strategy tells us that we need to take road safety into account and make sure that this is not compromised. It says that the council will not grant planning permission for new development that is likely to have a significant adverse impact on the safe and efficient operation of the road networks. The infrastructure in this area is already creaking at the seams, and the cumulative effect of this and the other developments expected in the area could push it over the edge. The core strategy is clear that we need to consider these impacts both in terms of individual developments but also cumulatively, and it states this at policy L4.8. Finally, we need to look at the alleged benefits because, of course, what we'll have to do is weigh these against the harms. And the developers will argue that there are benefits to the area which outweigh these harms. However, these benefits, supposed benefits, are not what the community needs. The local community is not at all opposed to residential development on this underused brownfield site, but this plan is not meeting their needs. This is contrary to NPPF paragraph 61, which requires us to provide an appropriate mix of housing to meet the needs of the population. So although residential units are provided, they are not the affordable family units that this community is crying out for. There's only 21% of it that is affordable and none of it is suitable for families. So in conclusion, okay, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. Residents have been clear that they aren't against the use of the brownfield site for new housing, but it should be sensitive to local concerns in keeping with the area, but also aspirational in terms of social, affordable and sustainable housing that enhances the local environment. It should be in keeping and character and surrounding two-storey houses, as the L7 of the Trafford core strategy says, that it should be in keeping. This application does none of these things. If we look at the affordable housing and the mix of housing that's provided, there's only 21% of affordable housing element offered here. It sits well below the required 40% for a hot area in good market conditions. This equates to only 8 units from the 38, and residents will not get to see the viability report. It will not be made transparent and open to them. The mix of housing also fails, what is predominantly an area of family homes. 29 of the units are 2 beds and 9 one-bed apartments that will attract young professionals. The committee report clearly references the core strategy policy L.24, which advocates 30% of small and larger 3+ bed apartments suitable for families. This development has no 3-bed apartments at all and will change the area considerably. L2.11.4 of the core strategy says there's a need for family housing across the borough. Many apartment buildings of 1 and 2 bed are located nearby, such as Roberts House, Budenberg, and these offer lots of that type of apartment. If we look at the on-site parking, the parking remains a major concern and falls short of Trafford's own requirements, and to a certain extent is gambling on low car parking uptake and small visitor numbers. The car parking provision only reaches 42 spaces, of which only 4 are for visitors. The layout of the car park also remains inefficient for deliveries, fails to give priority to pedestrians and cycle movements, and no safe footpaths for pedestrians. The main access to the development will be via the car park, which is narrow and means driving between parked cars. The entrance should be reconsidered and a clear route should be added to allow safe access. The current plan is not complete and could be dangerous and will cause frustration and anger among vehicle users and will frequently clog the entrance. If we look at the conditions, much in the committee report leaves many crucial concerns unanswered, and these are highlighted by many of the conditions. In paragraph 14 of the conditions, a residential travel plan will only be drawn up if the application is approved, but this needs to be demonstrated now, as these are tight-knit streets already with acute parking problems and clogged at peak time traffic. If we look at paragraph 6 and 7 of the conditions, and the methodology statement also fails to include site access. This is a major condition that needs to be looked at. We know that parking bays opposite the entrance prevent lorries turning into the site. No solution is proposed, and resident parking should not be impeded. There is also much concern around the demolition times, which can start from 7:30 a.m. from Monday to Friday. Many councils see 8 a.m. as a suitable start for such works, but in a condensed urban area such as this should be revised to a much later time. And there's also retired housing opposite the site. And the 2018 revised NPPF 180.A says it should mitigate and reduce a minimum potential of adverse impacts resulting from the noise of a new development and avoid noise giving a rise to significant adverse impacts on health and quality of life. But something that was also interesting is the cycling. Though there is cycling provision in these plans, there is no improvement in the local cycle network. The committee report also refers to relevant planning history in support of this application, and it cites the Altrincham Bridge link. Though planning approval was granted in 2016, the designs of this scheme are still very much in question. The design is proving too expensive for the local authority to support, and with weakness in the canal paths causing major concerns. So far, no viable scheme has been produced and should not be included in this report. My conclusion, to my knowledge, this application has been resubmitted with no new consultation of residents or councillors. Many of the concerns from the previous application have not been adequately addressed, such as parking, traffic, overmassing, and quality of life. This development will see a significant rise in the local population and should be rejected, and the council should encourage a more appropriate scheme for the area.
Thank you, Councillor Jerome. Councillor Young, would you like to take a seat? And you have 5 minutes, Councillor Young. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. As previously stated, this application is basically a revised version of the scheme which the committee rejected in its meeting last July. The main difference is that one floor and 4 apartments have been removed in an attempt to overcome the objections to the first application. This application was also sprung upon the residents. There was no formal proper consultation. There was the first time around, but this time not. The key issues, as I see, for the new development of this affecting new developments in Altrincham are set out in the local core strategy. They include ensuring the distinctive characteristics of the area are not lost through development, enhancing the street scene and to be compatible with surrounding areas, ensuring the proper levels of parking are provided, and meeting the housing needs of the borough. The core strategy policy L7 and the place objectives for Altrincham, together with SPD2, the A56 corridor, develops these themes. The proposed building is situated not far to the east of the A56, and due to its height and mass, will be readily visible from the Altrincham Gateway. Both policy L7 and SPD2 are specific that new builds should enhance the character and quality of the area and fit within the form of existing buildings. SPD2 is very critical of some of the past developments, including Roberts House, saying the monolithic scale of these modern developments has led to significant degradation of the street scene. At a height of 6 floors, this proposed tower will tower over the current scene and certainly will not enhance the scheme and will not fit within the current layout. The area of Bridgewater Road, Navigation Road, is predominantly 2-story terrace housing with some semi and detached family houses as well. A block of 3 to 6-story flats is not compatible with the locality and certainly does not improve the location. The skyline will be disrupted by the mass, and there will be shadow effects on the adjacent properties to the east, which were brought out in the previous report. I accept that the west, across the A56, the Budenberg development is of a similar height. However, it is set in a much larger area of ground and also at a ground at a lower level, which will reduces the impact. It is also separated by a major road and is a significant distance away from the proposed site. In summary, this proposed building does not fit the general character of the locality, nor does it enhance the street scene. It does not meet the objectives of the council's policies. The principal concern of the council's policy on parking is to protect street amenities from inappropriate parking and to ensure residential streets remain functional and safe for all users. This is already a cause of concern for residents due to overflow parking from offices in the area, which seriously impedes residents' parking. Of more concern, due to the narrowness of the roads when parked vehicles are taken into account, is access for emergency and delivery vehicles, which at times cannot pass through. The scheme should have 67 parking spaces by the council standards, but only 42 are being provided, and that includes an allowance of 4 for visitors. The developer's proposals for how those spaces are managed is not really workable, and I can see them being a cause of arguments and bad feelings between the residents of the building. The housing needs are set out in policy L2 of the core strategy in terms of provision of affordable housing and the mix of housing types, with 33% being 3-bed family accommodation. This would need 12 such units to meet this requirement. This area of Altrincham is primarily residential family housing. The proposal, which has no 3-bed flats and is not in character there, does not meet the requirements of policy L2. Okay, currently a number of schemes, no. The council's policy on low-cost housing in this area will require 40% of the build to be of that type. The scheme only provides half of that figure. There's a real and urgent need for low-cost housing in Altrincham. The road infrastructure is a significant problem. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I don't think I can.
Ms. Coley is going to give us some information. Thank you, Ms. Coley.
Thank you. I'd just like to clarify some of the points made, if I may, Chairman. The first one is that there has not been any planning application approved at the depot site. That was refused on the same evening. That application has not yet come back to us, although I Okay. Well, if I may, the depot site is generally known as the Wharf Road site. That's our understanding. If it's a different site, that wasn't made clear by the people speaking. So perhaps we should make that clear if it is the site at the other end. So their reference is not to the former council depot site, which was refused previously, but evidently to the site on the other end of Bridgewater Road, which they are correct has an application approved for, I believe, around 14 dwellings. Thank you, Chairman. I'd also like to clarify that the affordable housing requirement in good conditions is 45%, not 40. That's a matter of fact. And also that no weight in the officer report has been given to the cycle bridge scheme over the Bridgewater Canal. It's simply in there, referred in there for members' information in the planning history. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Coley. Do we have Mr. Tom Flanagan? Yep. Apologies for that. Sorry, Mr. Flanagan. Mr. Brumby, would you like to speak for those members, people speaking against? We usually take those first. Thank you, Mr. Brumby.
Okay, thank you. As residents, we would love for the Riley site to be redeveloped to something in keeping with the area, but the reasons why you rejected this development last time haven't changed. It's still totally out of character, overbearing, not enough car parking spaces, creates traffic problems for the A56, and it will dwarf our homes and skyline. There is only one way into the site via the heavily congested A56. Local roads are mostly single lane due to on-street parking. During busy times, vehicles are unable to turn off the A56 because of traffic's queuing along Navigation Road whilst the Metrolink barriers are down. This development will be increasing congestion to the A56, which goes against the SPD2 guidelines. We also feel let down by the planning report. It contains misleading information to create the impression that the development will need less car parking spaces than the SPD3 requirement. The TRICS data is meant to compare similar schemes, but it doesn't compare apples with apples. For example, one of the TRICS comparison sites is Rosebery Terrace in Stirling, Scotland. The 2011 census data for Rosebery shows that only 36% of residents are in work and 44% of residents are full-time students. Obviously, if you don't work, you're a lot less likely to own a car. The Rosebery residents also have on-street parking, which is free with no restrictions. Bridgewater Road is nothing like Rosebery. It is high employment and high competition for on-street parking. I urge you to discount the TRICS parking ratio as it's misleading. The officer's report also quotes research from the DCLG that car ownership figures are on average 0.7 per flat. However, again, this is wrong. The report incorrectly uses urban figures. This is a suburban location, so car ownership is a lot higher. This data is also over 17 years old. Last time I spoke to you, Bridgewater Road local census data for 2011 was mentioned a few times. It says that car ownership was 89%. However, what the report doesn't tell you is a large chunk of those houses are sheltered accommodation for the elderly, which are a lot less likely to own a car. So please don't rely on the census figure. The same applies to the bridge apartments, where a large chunk of houses are social housing, whose residents are yet again are less likely to own a car. Inexplicably, the officer's report doesn't include any of the data supplied by the residents and instead accepts the figures provided by the developer. For example, we obtained via Freedom of Information request the number of parking permits issued for Bridgewater Road and Brunswick, and this data shows that 1.2 car parking permits issued to each home. This means car ownership for the area is at least 120%, but this figure doesn't even include visitors, delivery vehicles, or the cars parked on driveways which don't need a permit. The question is, do you believe the developer's report, which hasn't provided the evidence required by the Lambeth methodology, which they've quoted, or do you believe the residents who provided the data and the photos that demonstrate the scale of the parking problem around Bridgewater Road and Woodfield Road? Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, Committee. My name is Tom Flanagan of Paul Butler Associates. I'm here to speak on behalf of the applicant, Mayor Property. As you will be aware, this application relates to a revised scheme following a previous refusal. The previous scheme was also recommended for approval, but was narrowly refused on two grounds: impacts on the character of the area and a shortfall in car parking provision. In response, the applicant has worked closely with council officers and has made key changes to the scheme. These include a reduction in the number of apartments from 42 to 38, a reduction in the height of the building through loss of a storey, and inclusion of visitor parking. We acknowledge the comments raised by the local community, and the design team feel that the revised scheme addresses these concerns. The scheme's reduced and varied height ensures that it respects the character of the area, providing a sensitive transition between the neighbouring houses and the taller buildings along the canal. Its height and density is wholly appropriate for the site due to its position adjacent to the canal and in a highly sustainable location. In terms of car parking, the scheme now provides 100% resident parking plus 4 visitor spaces. Robust transport reporting has been submitted with the application, which confirms that car ownership within the scheme is likely to be well below 100%, whilst also demonstrating that traffic generation will have a negligible impact on surrounding roads. That said, the applicant has agreed to a condition to provide giveaway markings at the junction of Wharf Road and Bridgewater Road. There are significant planning and regeneration benefits associated with the scheme. These include 1, redevelopment of a site which is currently occupied by a vacant, unattractive building. 2, a scheme of high design quality that respects the amenity of neighbouring residents and provides a positive addition to the canal waterfront. 3, making a valuable contribution to addressing the housing shortfall in the borough and providing 8 affordable units. 4, securing direct investment into the local community through construction jobs and spending by future residents in Broadheath. And 5, development of a scheme with high sustainability credentials. For example, the scheme involves redevelopment of a brownfield underused site and will therefore reduce the pressure to build on greenbelt open space land. The site is located in a highly accessible and sustainable location. The scheme encourages travel by public transport, walking and cycling. The scheme includes the installation of electric vehicle charging points, and it enhances the green infrastructure within the site. The development wholly complies with local and national planning policy guidance and will bring significant economic, social and environmental benefits. The development has the full support of council officers, the local highway authority and statutory consultees. We therefore hope that the committee are able to agree with the recommendation of their officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flanagan. Excellently timed. If you'd like to return to your seat. There are no more speakers. Would anybody like to open the debate? Yes. Councillor Evans.
Thank you. Can I have some clarification from Mrs. Coley around the number of sites? Is this there are two sites or there are 3 sites? I'm looking at the.
I'll show you on the plan behind us if that would help.
Yes.
That's the site we're looking at tonight. That's what we call the depot, the Wharf Road site. That's the site that came to planning committee in July and was refused at that time. Then, just off the top, yeah, I can't quite jump. That's what the residents have called the depot site, which has got a planning permission, which I think is a couple of years old for residential.
All accessible by Wharf Road.
Members of the public, I can't bring you into the debate now. It's up to the councillors now to speak. Thank you.
For the moment, no. Thank you.
Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. This is going to be relatively short and sweet. But I was at the previous meeting where we previously refused this site. The changes made have been relatively limited, and I do not believe that these relatively limited changes, in fact, very limited changes, resolve the issues that caused the refusal previously. For example, yes, there have been a reduction of the number of units by 4. So it's not exactly a massive change. It's more of a tinkering rather than a revision. So for the same reasons as the previous application, because I know Mrs. Gully will want reasons, for exactly the same reasons as the previous application, I propose refusal of this application in the same way as the barely amended previous application was refused. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened to the concerns of Mr Brumby and all 3 ward councillors, and I do share these concerns, especially when I actually look at the comparison of the refused design and the current design that's before us today. It'd be quite helpful if we could just look at that now, because I do feel it's almost like looking at a spot the difference puzzle. It really is very difficult to see what the changes are, and I think if that's the case, then I do share residents' concerns. I think all the issues that have been raised are unlikely to have been resolved, so therefore I can't support the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barclay. Councillor Patel.
Thank you. I mean, I think I was one of the only people that supported it last time. When you look at those pictures, the design comment, if you look at the historical sort of canal side works there, and you look at the height reduction, the roof line to there, I can see that losing a whole story of a building is a significant design change. I can't, next to canals, buildings of height are accepted. When we talk about overbearing, the block is set back from the street at the water's edge. Emery Close here, I mean, that's the existing property there. I mean, I accept the concerns about it won't be the void that is now, but it's staggered end of the development. And they've looked again at the allocation of car parking spaces, and they've completed new parking surveys on other blocks. I'm still unable to refuse that.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. Councillor Wetton.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, just in looking at the comparison picture there, if I'm seeing it right from this distance, it's not a straight comparison. And taking the key as the building on the right, the existing building on the right, it's the bottom graphic is a larger scale than the top graphic. So if you're trying to, I've got a funny look then, but if you have a look at what I'm saying, the building on the right, it's the same building in both cases. It's built already, isn't it? And it's a larger scale on the bottom picture. So that is not a straight comparison. And I just think that's important for us if we're using that as a reference. I have to say, I think I was the other one who supported it last time. I don't think you were on your own. And we heard a lot in the earlier debate about the importance of providing residential accommodation in Trafford, not just in Hale, but in Trafford. It's important, and there's opportunities in a scheme like this for a lot of people to have their own home. If I've got any criticism of this scheme, I don't particularly like the internal designs. I don't think that they're thrilling at all. But that would be up to individuals to decide whether they wanted to buy or rent a home that was designed like that. But at least I believe that they should have the opportunity. I think I can understand residents' concerns about the pressures, and I think it mainly revolves around vehicles, and I think that actually a set of apartments like that will actually there won't be as many car drivers as possibly is feared. Apparently somebody thinks that's rubbish, but I'm just giving my view on it as to how these things pan out. I also think that the immediate local economy could do with a boost, like a development like that. That particular part of the A56, the small traders that are along there, they certainly, that area certainly could do with a boost, which more local residents would provide. So if we're talking about the need for homes, as we have done a lot tonight, and we're talking about the local economy. I think there's 2 ticks in boxes there. The applicant has addressed the issues that he was tripped up on last time, the impact on character and the shortfall in parking. So for me, I still feel that I can support this. I supported it last time. I think this is a slightly better scheme, and I would still support it.
Thank you, Councillor Wetton. Councillor Malik.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we only refused this application a few months back. But since then, the applicant has worked with our planning department. And I think our planners do understand the issues better than, I would say, most of us. But we do understand the issues as well. I think they have worked with the planners, and I think they have come with the right solution, and which is acceptable by the planners. So I will recommend this, that we recommend this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Malik. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And I suppose really I sort of agree with the sentiments expressed by Councillor Dr. Barclay. It does feel a little bit like Groundhog Day, this really. The last time that this came to Planning Committee, I think it was rejected principally because of concerns around scale and massing of the development. I spoke, I think, about specifically concerns relating to the impact that would be felt because of the development by residents on Emery Close. I was concerned regarding the proximity of the development and those residents living on Emery Close. I have to say I'm not sure I can agree with Councillor Wetton that the applicant has addressed the issues they tripped upon last time, because as far as I can tell, there's minimal changes to the application. You know, when you look at the footprint of the application, the change is negligible. I accept that there has been a change in the number of stories, but I'm not sure that that's particularly significant. So I'm struggling with this one, to be honest. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Bunting.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Also, just whilst I agree with what your Vice Chairman just said, just to make one thing I didn't say in my initial thoughts was that, yes, we have the initial harm caused by for the reasons I went through previously, but in terms of the mitigation, in terms of the positive benefit that has been alluded to, as was pointed out on numerous occasions by the objectors and Councillor Coggins, they've missed the target in terms of the positive benefit, because we're after family homes in this area and it's all 1 and 2 bed apartments. So yes, there is additional housing being provided, which is great. We all look forward to that, but they've missed the goal. You know, so that they've gone for the wrong kind of accommodation for their area. So the positive good it could have done if they planned the right thing, they're not going to do because they planned the wrong thing. So the positive benefit that could have mitigated the harm doesn't. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Bunting. Ms Cole is going to give a comment for us.
Thank you. If I could just clarify a couple of points. Officers have looked at the scheme on the depot site at the far end of Bridgewater Road, and that's got just for members' information, that has an approval for 10 maximum, not 14. So there's one approval for 4, one approval for 10, but you couldn't implement them both for the same site. I'd just also like to make the point that in terms of family housing and our policies around family housing, that development plan policy is acknowledged to be out of date. So the weight that can be given to that in the planning balance is limited. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to commend Mr. Brumby on his presentation. Actually, of all the presentations we've had, it was very good. Well done one. So thank you for that. I tend to pick on a few items when people object to things, and I'd like to pick on the character. I don't think the applicant has addressed his the car parking or the impact at all, and the character loss coming over that Broadheath Bridge, which is magnificent. And I do accept that what we have there at the moment with the whole of the manor garage, the whole thing is particularly ugly. But some vision for that whole gateway into Altrincham would really improve it tremendously. And that just takes from the character of the whole place. It's sort of Victorian terraces. I think the bridge is probably 1920s. There's such character there, and maybe it's a lovely location and just a different style of vision rather than trying to. Obviously, we need to the developer and potentially the council need to squeeze the best out or the most out of any given site. But I think it's just too much. At this, well, it's just too much, just as simple as that. And I don't believe that he's addressed his two reasons. And it's quite telling, interestingly, when I've got it on Street View here. Well, it's not on Street, I've got it on Satellite View. There is no Street View. I guess the Google car couldn't get up there due to congestion because there is no Street View. It's hardly scientific. But anyway, I think it needs a whole rethink. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Any other members wish to comment? Can I say, I've looked at this a lot, and when I looked at the drawings today and compared before and after, I could see a difference when with that top story removed. I hear what Councillor Wen says about the scale, but I do feel that makes a difference. On the other hand, when I went to view that site, and I said it previously, when you turn left onto Wharf Road, it's a tiny junction. It's what Councillor Evans was saying. That area was not built for high-rise flats. They are high-rise flats we're talking about here. So I just don't think it fits. And I hear what the residents have said about traffic, but we didn't reject it previously on traffic. And I think if we went back to that issue, I know the residents are very particular about the issue, but I don't think we can resurrect that. I would support Councillor Bunting's recommendation that we use the same reasons that we used previously. And with all due respect to the developer, the concerns we had have not been addressed. And so if it's not been seconded, I'll second refusal of this application. If no other members want to speak, I think we should take it to a vote. It's been moved and seconded that we refuse this application.
Chairman, if I could, just for members' benefit, remind them of those reasons for refusal so they know what they're voting for, if that's okay. Thank you. So the previous application was refused for two reasons. The first being the proposed development, by reason of its scale, massing and design, will cause significant harm to the character of the area. As such, the proposal will be contrary to policy L7 of the Trafford core strategy and advice contained within the National Planning Policy Framework. The second reason for refusal was the proposed development, by reason of a shortfall in the level of on-site car parking provision, would result in overspill parking on surrounding residential streets to the detriment of residential amenity and highway safety. For this reason, the proposal would be contrary to policies L4 and L7 of the Trafford core strategy, the Council Supplementary Planning Document 3, Parking Standards and Design, and advice contained within the National Planning Policy Framework. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we refuse this application. All those in favour of refusal, please show. And those against? I think that application has been refused. Thank you, everybody. That application has been refused. We're going to go to page 12 on the agenda. That's Davy Hume West, land adjacent to 95 Dunster Drive, Flixton. And we have a speaker against this application, Councillor Whitton. Councillor Whitton, would you like to take a seat? Just wait for everybody to settle down. Councillor Whittam, you have. We're missing. Ms. Cole is going to give us some background information.
Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks outline permission for the erection of 4 dwellings on a site located adjacent to an existing housing development. The site is currently tarmacked and used informally for overspill parking for neighbouring dwellings. It is considered that the development will make a positive contribution to the council's housing land supply, whilst the other main considerations relate to highways, parking, and the potential impact on the amenity of neighbouring residential properties. The proposed development has not provided the requisite pedestrian visibility displays of 2 metres by 2 metres either side of the driveways, as the driveways are tight to the site edge. In relation to vehicular visibility displays, one of the 6 driveways fails to meet the requisite vehicular visibility display of 2 metres by 43 metres. Notwithstanding the above, given the location of the proposed development adjacent to existing houses, the lack of opportunity for traffic to exceed 20 miles an hour, and evidence provided by the transport consultant, it's considered that the scheme is acceptable in terms of highway safety. The proposed development would have a tight relationship with existing dwellings to the rear of the site, and a bespoke design would be required at reserve matter stage to prevent any loss of privacy or close overlooking. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Coley. Councillor Whittam, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this proposed development falls within my ward of Davyhulme West. A number of residents have raised concerns about the proposed development on land adjacent to 95 Downton Drive. The proposed site has caused considerable confusion for residents over a number of years, with a long-standing plan for the site to be used as a children's play area not materialising, and residents telling me that they've struggled to identify ownership of the land in previous years. For development of this size, there has been considerable concern raised by residents living close to the development. This highlights the very real concerns residents have about the nature of the development, which risks being out of keeping with this area. These concerns include the lack of affordable housing within the proposal, increased traffic and parking problems, the impact of building on land adjacent to the Greenbelt, long-standing problems with sewers in the area, and the impact on access to Jack's Lane Farm, and impact on wildlife, including bats. I recognise that the officer's report has dealt with some of these concerns raised by residents, particularly in respect of ensuring properties on the site are of no more than 2 storeys, and that the privacy of neighbouring properties needs to be considered and maintained at reserve stage. However, this does not guarantee that any future development will be in keeping with the area. Indeed, the size of the plots is such that the situating of 4 properties on this site will be out of keeping with the detached housings on Dunster Drive. A number of objections raised by residents have not been dealt with, and I will cover these in the next minute or so. There's been long-standing problems with the sewers connecting 107 and 95 Dunster Drive, and this has resulted in sewage flooding up into gardens and in one instance inside one of the properties. There have been a number of sewer collapses in the vicinity of 97 Dunster Drive, and residents understandably have concerns about the ability of the sewage system to cope with any additional demand. As part of their objections, residents submitted photographs showing sewer collapses, but these have not been shown on the agenda for the Planning and Development Committee documents. The area is regularly used as an overflow car park, and the officer's report does not provide an assessment of the knock-on effect of cars being displaced and residents having to park on the road. This site is also used by residents to access the rear of their properties, and the development of this site will lead to loss of that amenity. The road next to the proposed development site is used to access Jack's Lane Farm. This is an important access route, enabling the farm to function on a day-to-day basis. As well as the risk of access to the farm being blocked or hindered during development, the increased level of housing and therefore cars in the area risk blocking off access to the farm once the development is complete. The access route must remain clear at all times to enable the farm to operate and function as a business. Blocking this route could have a detrimental impact on the farm financially if it hinders its business operations. May also create road safety hazards should tractors and other machinery not be able to pass into the farm via that access route. In respect of impinging on the residents' privacy, the officer's report notes that the layout and design of any development do not form part of this application and are submitted as a separate reserved matter application, and that, I quote, "It is expected therefore that any reserved matters application will be based on a bespoke scheme to address impact on residential amenity as well as design issues raised above. However, the development still risks impinging on the privacy of 19, 34 and 36 Compton Close. These properties have rear gardens adjoining the application site. The length of the rear gardens within the proposed development is 8 metres, less than the 10.5 metres advised by PG1. Similarly, the window-to-window distance between the dwellings would be approximately 21 metres, therefore falling short of the guideline in PG1, which states that 27 metres is usually required to access, usually required across private gardens. Finally, there's considerable wildlife activity in this area. There's an elm tree and overhanging trees that are not shown on the site plan. Given the importance and rarity of elm trees, the environmental impact of this development is of concern to residents. Bats are a regular sight in the area, and any development is likely to impact on them negatively. Natural England recommends that surveys for bats should be conducted in areas where bats are reported and where developments are likely to disturb their habitat, and where there is presence of trees, that bats are likely to use. Any building works on this site is likely to disturb the bat population in the area. As has also been mentioned in the officer's report, there is issues around vehicular visibility. So I'll finish. Just the last point is just to reiterate what the officer said about vehicular visibility in terms of the size of the parking spaces. That's also of concern, and I don't think it's been addressed in the officer's report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Matthew Shipman. I'm speaking in support of the application on behalf of Persimmon Homes. As you're aware, this application seeks consent for the erection of 4 semi-detached dwellings located within an established residential estate on a small parcel of brownfield land. The land presently has no formal use, albeit it has been tarmacked, and I'm aware that the site is occasionally used to park vehicles. It is my understanding that this land was intentionally left undeveloped when the estate was originally built due to the presence of overhead power lines crossing the site. But prior to submitting this application, I received confirmation from National Grid that the land is no longer affected by any of these apparatus. National planning policy makes it clear that housing applications should be considered in the context of the presumption in favour of sustainable development. It encourages effective use of land by reusing land that has been previously developed, provided it is not of high environmental value. Additionally, there is a strong emphasis within the NPPF on delivering smaller sites for development. It is clear, therefore, that in principle, this scheme accords with these objectives. This application presents an opportunity to contribute towards the district's housing supply by utilising a sustainable and accessible brownfield location within an established residential area, which is in proximity to local services and amenities. It also limits the need for the council to consider releasing greenbelt land to meet its housing supply targets. Throughout the application process, I am aware that a small number of the adjoining neighbours have raised some concerns, namely regarding privacy and the general design of the dwellings. In response, whilst the precise design and appearance of the dwellings are not being assessed as part of this application, we have agreed with the council that there should be no clear first floor rear windows, and the dwellings will be restricted to 2 stories in height. Taking this into consideration, the dwellings will not detract from the existing character and appearance of the estate, and they will not introduce any detrimental privacy issues. The scheme will also accord with the council's supplementary planning guidance document for the new residential development. Members can therefore be assured that the final scheme's design, layout and appearance will be in keeping with the overall character of the estate and will not cause detrimental harm to the residential amenities currently enjoyed by its occupants. May I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I trust the committee to ensure that this application can be improved in line with officer recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shipman. You'd like to return to your seat. Would any members like to open the debate? Councillor Bunting.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, this is what, when I visited the site, it looked very much like a sort of a vacant plot, and I must admit, I was wondering why it hadn't been developed previously, and now we have the answer. It was power line issues that apparently prevented this. But yeah, in terms of the reasons for raised in terms of objections to this, well, you know, the arguments that there was a rumour it might be a play area, that's not the material issue that we can refuse it on now. In terms of increasing traffic, well, no more than if you had a normal road layout, houses on each side of it. I don't think these two-person semis is going to generate a huge amount of traffic that's going to cause a problem, given the road layout and the way they're situated. In terms of the sewer issues that were raised, well, that's obviously again not so much an issue for us, more of a building standards issue. In terms of access to the farm, I can't see how this will really impact upon that. I mean, yes, there may be some issues in terms of the construction phase, but that's in terms of any access to anything, in terms of a minor inconvenience, in terms of temporary blockages, in terms of construction. In terms of the semis being out of character of the area, which was also mentioned, well, there's plenty of semis in the area, not right next to it, but if you look at the plan, there are numerous semis. In terms of the privacy distances and the designs, well, again, that's more of a matter for the reserve matters application and what have you. So based on that quick run through of the various objections that were raised, I can't see anything there that would cause a reason to refuse it. On that basis, Chairman, I propose grant. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Evans.
Working now. Thank you, Chair. Was that a proper? Have you proposed this? I'll second it. I understand why it's here. We've had 6 objections, but I'm shocked it is here. Really, it seems I'm very, very familiar. I spent a lot of time on Downton Drive in my early life. It's got good access. It's beyond me, really. Why we're even talking about it? Four homes. There's no requirement for affordable homes. If the sewers are faulty, then utilities or whoever's responsible need to fix them, and it's not a planning concern, is it? Really, I don't think it is. And 4 properties down there, I'd totally support this. Really, simple as that.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Any other members wish to comment? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. This is a site that I visited some weeks ago now, and I can understand why residents immediately in the properties surrounding the site have some concerns, because it does strike me as being quite a small site to try and develop some properties on. My understanding of the history of the application is that the developer originally wanted 3-storey houses to be built there. So I have to say, I don't think the developer's done themselves any favour trying to get residents on side. And for that reason, I really welcome condition 4 that's been added on into the report, which stipulates that the development should not be in excess of 2 stories. I'll listen to the views of other members tonight before I come to a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any other comments? Anybody? Can I say, when I visited the site, it is a site that can take housing, but I do feel that 4 houses is too many on there. And to me, when you look at the map, it's more like a site for 2 houses rather than 4. And I hear what Councillor Bunting has said about traffic and possible congestion on the building phase. Councillor Evans mentioned the sewers, but I do think it's out of keeping with 4 houses on that site. I do think is out of keeping at that location, and the distances from the rear gardens to the properties to the rear, they are short significantly, so much so that we can't be having clear glass in some of those elevations to the rear. So I do have concerns about this application, but I'm sensing there's not a lot of support for me. Councillor Patel's going to comment now, hopefully, in my support.
Just wanted it's a question really. Is obscured glass at first floor level a usual condition? I've never, on some windows, but on the entire first floor, is that usual?
Yes, in terms of obscure glazing windows to prevent overlooking, yeah, that would be common, and it would be common at first floor. Obviously, at reserve matter stage, we'd have to establish that the rooms that glazing served had a level of amenity, i.e. they had a clear glass outlook somewhere. If they were a bedroom, if it was a bathroom, if they put the bathrooms on the back and the bedrooms at the front, then that wouldn't be an issue. We think there's certainly a deliverable scheme with that constraint. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Patel, do you need to comment any further?
Four houses on that site does seem a lot, but if the developer says it's deliverable and the planners are happy to recommend, it does seem to to fit in terms of the layout of Dunster. But yep, reasonably supportive of it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. And those against? That application has been granted. Thank you. We're going to go to page 149. That's land at Higher House Farm, Dairy House Lane in Altrincham. We have two speakers in favour of this application. Miss Coley is going to give us some background information first. Miss Coley.
Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks full planning permission for the creation of a 300-space car park for use predominantly by the Cartwright Group. 50 spaces are proposed to be leased to other businesses in the Broadheath industrial area. The application site is a field located within the Greenbelt, which is accessed via an existing track off Dairy House Lane. The scheme has been amended during the course of the application, which has resulted in the vehicular access being relocated to a point directly off Dairy House Lane, away from residential dwellings. The pedestrian access to the car park has also been relocated further away from nearby residential dwellings along Dairy House Lane. The pedestrian access connects to a point on the opposite side of Dairy House Lane, where a footpath is proposed which will provide a connection to the wider Broadheath industrial estate area. The pedestrian footpath is not included as part of the application and will be secured by a grampian condition and provided via a Section 278 agreement with the local highway authority. 19 letters of support from businesses within the Broadheath industrial estate area have been received, and 6 letters of objection from 3 residential addresses have been received. The content of these letters is summarised at pages 157 to 159 of the committee report. The principle of the proposed development within the Greenbelt is considered to be inappropriate. Paragraph 143 of the NPPF states that inappropriate development is, by definition, harmful to the Greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Paragraph 144 of the NPPF sets out that very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the Greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations. The applicant has set out a number of very special circumstances which are explored in detail, paragraphs 19 to 69 of the committee report. To summarise, the very special circumstances put forward by the applicant are that the lack of car parking within the Cartwright Group estate and the wider Broadheath industrial estate impacts on the operational capacity and business growth plans of the Cartwright Group, and to a more limited extent the growth of other businesses. The current situation results in parking difficulties for staff who have to arrive earlier for their shifts than they would otherwise need to, which in turn causes disruption and disturbance, often in the early hours of the morning, impacting on the amenity of nearby residents, staff being late for work, and highway safety issues due to inconsiderate and dangerous parking. Crucially, this has an impact on the ability of the Cartwright Group to retain skilled staff, which impacts on the operational capacity and growth of the business. As a local employer, the Cartwright Group employs 860 members of staff, which represents around 8.5% of the overall jobs in the Trafford manufacturing sector. If the current parking situation cannot be resolved, the Cartwright Group has stated that it will have to consider downsizing and/or relocation. In order to facilitate the proposed development, a number of trees need to be felled. Details of these proposed works, along with mitigation measures, are outlined in paragraphs 72 to 82 of the committee report. Officers are satisfied that the proposed tree works and mitigation measures are acceptable. Officers are also satisfied that the proposed development is acceptable in terms of design, highway safety, equality issues, residential amenity, ecology, drainage and landscaping. In applying the test set out in the NPPF, it is acknowledged that the proposed car park represents inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, and that other harm will result from the tree loss necessary to accommodate the development, and there will be some limited ecological impacts as a result, even though mitigation measures are proposed. However, it is considered that significant benefits will flow from the provision of the car park, most importantly to the operation of the Cartwright Group's business, as it will help them to retain and recruit staff by providing the employees with car parking, thereby allowing the company to realise its expansion plans. In terms of the wider economic benefits that will result from this, it is acknowledged that employment growth at the site has risen sharply from 513 employees in 2011 to 864 employees currently, and the company expects this employment figure to grow further to 1,000 employees by 2020 to 21. When considered together with the other benefits that should result to residential amenity and highway safety, it is considered that these benefits clearly outweigh the harm by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm, and the case put forward by the applicant therefore amounts to the very special circumstances required to justify the development in the Greenbelt. Proposed development is therefore considered to constitute acceptable development in the Greenbelt, compliant with core strategy policy R4 and the MPPF, and so is recommended for approval subject to the recommended conditions listed on pages 183 to 189 of the committee report and the amended conditions contained in the additional information report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Coley. I'm looking round at the members. Councillor Evans.
Point of clarification. At the moment, and I know the trailer store doesn't.
What I was, there are speakers, and what I was going to say was I was looking to see if anybody was interested in testing the water. That's not the case. So we need to hear our speakers. And the first speaker is Mrs. Donna Barber. Mrs. Barber, would you like to step forward? And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Committee. I'm Donna, the planning agent, acting on behalf of the Cartwright Group. I think Rebecca Coley has summarised the officer report, which we found to be comprehensive and a very fair and balanced assessment of the proposal before you this evening. But I'd just like to take a moment to reiterate 5 points. There were 4, but because of what we've just said, I think I've got a point of clarification myself. So firstly, the critical and immediate need for the car park, as evidenced in the planning, highway and economic reports we submitted with the application, has been accepted by officers as weighing heavily in favour of this application. Secondly, the importance of the Cartwright Group to the borough's economy has increased significantly since the early 2000s when applications were previously before you. And as mentioned, now account for no less than 8.5% of all manufacturing jobs within the borough. These are full-time jobs across a range of skills and also include award-winning apprenticeships. And again, this has been given significant weight in the planning balance. Thirdly, officers assess in detail the thorough and robust alternative site assessment that we submitted with the application and agree that we have evidence that there are simply no alternative sites available within an agreed search area. This search did include the interrogation of the Cartwright's own land, as well as investigating whether other occupiers such as Asda or the owners of the former B&Q would consider leasing space even in the short term, and the appointment of agents to actively seek and find other sites. Fourthly, there is comprehensive planting proposed as part of the proposals. The design concept is to bring forward a National Trust style car park rather than just chucking some sort of tarmac down and allowing it to happen. Its sensitive location has been considered carefully. There is removal of trees to facilitate the new access that was done as a result to the consultation stage of the application, but there is no net loss of trees across the site, and I note that GMEU raised no concerns on the ecological impact. Finally, we have consulted extensively with the community, neighbours and businesses, both before we submitted the application, before we even put pen to paper with the design, and also during the consideration of the application where we brought forward some amendments. The scheme has evolved to ensure that the proposed car park would be secure. That was one of the issues that some residents raised, and that residents' amenity isn't harmed. And we think this is evidenced in the level of support that has been received for the proposals, some of which are from, well, a lot of which are from the local businesses, but some of national and international importance, such as JCB and cotton traders, who are also suffering from the car parking situation for this employment area. We've worked to bring forward a sensitive solution to what's a major problem in this area that will, if you're minded to agree with the officer recommendation and grant planning, allow these businesses to continue to operate efficiently and support the borough's economy. Thank you.
You'd like to take a seat, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Pleased to know, Chairman, I won't take 5 minutes. Well, can I just thank members of the committee for hearing the application this evening, and just start by acknowledging, I think in the 11 years that I've represented Bowden Ward, the issue of car parking around Atlantic Street and the overspill into Dunham Massey and the surrounding area has been prevalent throughout that entire period. And I think the report references a number of different attempts over that decade to be able to try and bring forward a solution that would have a permanent parking opportunity, particularly for Cartwright's employees, but for wider businesses in that area as well. And so to be able to see an officer report as we have this evening that acknowledges the work that's been undertaken in forming the planning application, I think is particularly welcome, and I hope that members support the recommendation that is outlined in the report this evening. So just to quickly reflect, Cartwrights has already been acknowledged as a major employer in Trafford and Broadheath. 8.5% of manufacturing jobs are in Cartwrights for Trafford. That is a significant contribution to employment. I understand that a certain Stephen Anstey supports Cartwrights and has been on a number of occasions, as indeed have I. But one of the things that we know is that parking is a completely major issue for us, and to be able to resolve that, and it's dealt with adequately in the officer's report, I'm pleased with. I know there are a small number of objections from local residents. I think that's to be expected on something that has something like this, but certainly the benefits that have been outlined in the report significantly outweigh the harm. And indeed, as a regular attender at Dunham Massey Parish Council, I know in Dunham Massey they're particularly keen to see this resolved as well. And so reference was just made around the attempts to have an exemplary, I think, consultation process in trying to form the planning application and the submission, and I just commend that to members of the committee. And so I think, without wishing to add any further to debate this evening, because I should really go and join the Broadheath Ward Christmas party that I've missed for 3 hours to be here already, and ask members of the committee to kindly support the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anstey. Councillor Dr. Barclay is going to open the debate.
Thank you, Chairman. I really welcome this application. It's obviously I'm a councillor in Bowden Ward, and like Councillor Anstey, I know that there's been a very, very long history of concerns from local residents about the issues that have arisen from employees of Cartwrights parking on Dairy House Lane, where there's residential houses. It has caused residents lots of distress and unhappiness over the years. We have had various applications come to committee, but they haven't really worked out. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome this new application this evening. I would like to also say that I'm really, really impressed by the consultation that's been carried out by Cartwrights and Eden Planning. It really has been exemplary. They've spoken with residents, they came to Dunham Massey Parish Council, they've really taken on board our residents' concerns, and I hope that other businesses who are looking to do the same thing perhaps could take a leaf out of Eden Planning and Cartwrights on this occasion. It is always really, really hard to lose green belt. Obviously, it's very precious in all our wards. We want to retain it, but I do think they are very, very special circumstances. We value Cartwrights a lot. They are, as Councillor Anstey said, a very important employer within the borough. And I do really think that although it's with a heavy heart that we lose the green belt, it is really important that we allow this company to thrive. And the other thing that really makes me less distressed to lose the green belt on this occasion is the fact that unusually the information that's come into the council from local residents has been actually more letters of support than actual letters of complaint, and so that is very, very reassuring. So I'm very, very pleased to see the application. I hope that members around the table can join me in supporting it too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Barclay. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid my colleague, Councillor Dr. Barclay's wish that we're going to get agreement all down the table is going to fail at the first hurdle, I'm afraid. I'm going to disagree with the officer recommendation. Whilst I fully agree that there is a serious problem in the area, there are lots of parking issues, and that Cartwrights obviously is at the heart of that, I just disagree with the best way to resolve this issue. Yes, it needs fixing, but not in this way. As we've already heard, there were alternative sites looked at, and one of them was in Cartwright's homeland immediately adjacent to it, and they had a permission for that. But as has been pointed out, the reason they didn't want to go ahead with that is because it didn't look nice next to their main entrance. They didn't think it sort of presented their site well. Well, the only reason it doesn't look nice next next to their main entrances because that's the way they've designed it to look. They could redesign that car park for that location in order to make it look suitable. That would then reap all the benefits of this scheme, plus it wouldn't sacrifice the green belt at the same time. So whilst I accept that Cartwright has an issue in terms of the problem that it itself is causing because of the parking, and yes, I accept there needs to be a solution made available to allow Cartwrights to fix it, I believe this is the wrong one. And I don't believe there are special circumstances sufficient here. There are convenient circumstances sufficient, convenient for Cartwrights, that is, but I don't see why the green belt should be the one to cop the fall in terms of allowing Cartwright to keep its site as it wants it to, rather than building this alternative site within that. I think, as I say, there are alternatives. Yes, something must be done, but this is not the something. I don't see why the green belt should suffer when there is an alternative, even if it's not the alternative that Cartwright prefers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Ms Cole is going to give us some clarification. Thank you, Ms Cole.
Yes, if I could just clarify that the car park shown on as an alternative does not have planning permission. They would need to get planning permission for that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Coley. Councillor Coggins.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Mrs Barber and Councillor Anstey for their clear and thoughtful arguments. I wanted to start by, acknowledging all the benefits that, as other people have commented, that we get from Cartwrights, and particularly paragraphs 44 to 46 there talk about the employment, the business to the area, their contribution to the Trafford Pledge and the apprenticeship scheme, and I think it's very important that we acknowledge that. I think, as Councillor Bunting has said, the key to this is about whether or not the harm to the green belt is outweighed by the very special circumstances that the Cartwrights are claiming here. And that's my concern. And paragraph 18 tells us that it's a matter for the decision maker to decide if this is the case or not. In particular, so there's a lot of mention in the representations here of road safety and congestion concerns. And as Councillor Bunting said, something clearly must be done. We know, we've all heard that this is an ongoing problem for many years. But we also have decades of evidence to show that congestion and road safety concerns cannot be assuaged by building more car parking. The more infrastructure we make to enable driving, the more driving we get. And we've got to look at some other solutions here. The very special circumstances that I think would be required to legitimate this level of harm to the green belt are going to have required, I think, more in-depth looking at other alternatives. Other sites for car parks are not the only options here. And I read the transport statement and the addendum to the transport statement, and we see that there's relatively low levels of car sharing, I think 14%, that there's no showers for cyclists, which is something that many big companies and even smaller companies provide. We hear that 60% of workers live within 10 miles, but we've got this very low level of cycling and pedestrian access. There are creative solutions that employers have used in the past, such as running shuttle buses to local town centres or to Metrolinks and bus stops, and that could be shared with other businesses in the area, or providing much higher level of cycling facilities. There's a lot of things that could be done before we sacrifice the green belt here. So I'm concerned that the harm to the openness and of the green belt, and to particularly the safeguarding of the countryside from encroachment, is perhaps not warranted by the level of alternatives that I've seen sought for here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coggins. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I have some familiarity with Cartwrights as an employer, as they happen to employ a lot of residents from Bucklow St Martin's ward. First of all, I'd just like to reflect on the quality of the report that's before us this evening. It's 40 pages in length, and I think it's a really robust report that goes into great detail to make the case that the threshold for very special circumstances has been met. Some of the work that you see in paragraph 48 and in paragraph 28, it's clear that officers and Cartwrights have worked together to try and document that there's a really strong case to approve very special circumstances have been met here. The other thing I'd like to reflect on is that the applicants clearly cooperated with the council to try and mitigate the concerns that have been highlighted throughout the process. And I think that Miss Barber was capable of testifying to that before. I'm strongly in favour of approving this report because it's of approving this application because it strikes me that it's a workable and a practical solution to what is a massive problem in the local area. It works for employees who struggle to find secure and convenient parking close to their workplace. It works for an employer who is keen to continue to contribute to Trafford's economy and to grow. And it's welcome that they are a growing company. And it works for residents who at present are routinely displaced by the terrible parking practices that we see all the time in the local area. I think the question before us this evening is whether or not the threshold of very special circumstances has been met. And I believe that that threshold has been met. I think the report's documented that. And consequently, I'll formally propose that we approve the application before us tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Hobbs, please.
Thank you, Chair. I visited this evening as darkness fell, and the road around here are a complete nightmare. And the reason why is parked cars all down Dairy House Lane, all around the corner. It was an absolute nightmare to go around there today. So I can see some big issues there. There is a critical and immediate need for a car park due to the safety concerns on the road. And Cartwright, as already has been outlined, is a vital local employer, as evidenced by the growth in employment figures. I visited the factory a couple of years ago with Councillor Evans, was incredibly impressed by the work they do and the number of local people that they employ. And we certainly don't want to lose them in Trafford. I think this proposal provides a solution to the parking issues in a sensible and sustainable way, and I particularly like the fact that the applicant has worked closely with the planning department. It's a great use of the land. It's well hidden. It's surrounded by trees. I think that also looks good and will be welcomed probably by some of the local residents as well. As outlined in the report, the harm to Greenbelt is outweighed by the significant benefits that will be reaped by the provision of the car park. Therefore, I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hobbs. Councillor Patel.
Thank you. As a relatively new member of the committee, I think I appreciate the gravity of this decision and the need to meet these special circumstances. I echo Councillor Williams's comments on the quality of the report, and yes, I believe we've met those special circumstances. Cartwrights are a significant large employer, skilled manufacturing jobs, award-winning apprenticeships. Is exactly the type of firm we need to retain and grow in Trafford. It's what Trafford's built on. That said, Councillor Coggins's comments about the robustness of the travel plan, I think Cartwrights really do need to look at that quite well. And what my concern is, if this is built and this is successful and it takes the problem parking away from the estate, will other firms fill that void? Will other firms grow and come and say the same thing? As a local authority, do we need to follow this up in terms of traffic restrictions around the site? Because it's they've allocated 50 for local other firms. When they need those themselves, where are they going to go? I was reassured that this will be a sensitive design. I think we've all been to a National Trust car park, and I can envisage that would sit quite nicely where it is. So yes, I'm happy to approve it.
Okay, there's no more speakers. It's been Councillor Bunting makes a comment.
If I may, Chairman, whilst I obviously disagree with this application going through, if we are to pass it, may I make one request, if I may, through you, Chairman, and that is, I understand that there are conditions regarding parking restrictions, as mentioned just a moment or so ago, but these are due to follow later. Now, in order to make the special circumstances even remotely logical, and I must admit I disagree with them as they are, but if we are going to do this, then these should be included in at the time, because otherwise you've given the consent for this car park to be put through on the grounds that it's to resolve all the problems that Cartwright's causing with the parking, yet at the same time there are no parking restrictions to stop people simply parking where they're parking now anyway, because that's closer to the factory door than this car park. So unless you actually have the conditions, a condition for parking restrictions in as this part of this application, and that they must be enforced before the car park is made operational, any logical argument goes out the window. I'm still disagreeing with the application as a whole, but if we are going to approve it, could that please be included? Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Bunting, I'm looking for advice from Highways. Ms. Coley.
Thank you. Yeah, there's no reason why that. It might be good to identify the area you want to cover in terms of the magnitude of that traffic regulation order in terms of the streets, just to refine where it goes down to. But there has been a significant amount of work done on the area, and we do recognise the concerns of the parking, and we've already explored the possibility of putting TROs in surrounding areas where it's dangerous to park. And this obviously assists and helps that. And in fact, you may be able to, with this, you certainly might be able to displace a lot more cars than what currently would ordinarily be done, as we are taking it forward at the moment.
Thanks for that. So we can condition that, Ms. Coley.
You can. I think in terms of the deliverability, members need to be careful about the timing of that condition. What you don't want to do is for a TRO process to unduly hold up the implementation of this development. So, I mean, I would recommend that you defer and delegate that to officers to put that condition on, but agree the implementation period with the applicant if that is something the members will accept.
Yeah. I think we're all supportive of Councillor Bunting's. Councillor Evans.
Well, I'm not supportive of it. I actually thinking of what Councillor Patel said. Hopefully, these roads will fill up as these businesses grow. So I think that's something we need to take a view of as things develop. And I'm not suggesting that we want cars to park on the road, but we have a busy industrial estate there, and it isn't dangerous. It is congested, but it isn't. It's far from dangerous. So I think I would like to see how it develops. To be fair.
Councillor Anstey, you'd like to give us some advice?
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to come back in. A number of traffic restrictions have already recently just been implemented in the surrounding areas of Atlantic Street and across Dunham that included the provision of WLR lines. There's very few on-street public parking spaces that are available in Dunham Massey now, so I'm not entirely sure that another TRO process, that when one has just recently been completed, would be helpful for the committee to consider.
Okay, I think we need to take this to a vote. Councillor Bunting, well, rather, Ms. Coley, would you outline what Councillor Bunting had said about proposed parking restrictions at the implementation of the new car?
Councillor Bunting is suggesting that a scheme for further traffic regulation orders in the area is drawn up, consulted on, and implemented before any work on the car park takes place. I would be cautious about that.
I'm not sure he did say that.
What I said was before the car park is made operational, i.e. you can build it, but you can't use it until you've got the restrictions in place. I didn't say don't build it or lay it or whatever one does with a car park.
I don't think the developer would take the risk of building the car park on the risk that the TROs would not be successful. That would be my advice. That's too much of a risk, I think, but that's for members to consider.
Councillor Anstey came forward to advise us that he didn't think that was a good idea. Councillor, Mr. Furby would like to comment.
I think you've got a serious issue if you make that the subject of a condition, because there isn't the control over that. And I think it's something that if you make particularly the first use of the car park subject to such a condition, I think it means that you're effectively negating the consent in those circumstances.
Okay, I think what we're saying is that Councillor Bunting is well-meaning in this proposal, but I don't think it's got the support of us. So we're going to go for granting of this application as it stands. Propose and second. Who proposed that we refuse? You did. Councillor seconded refusal. You happy to support refusal? Second that. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded that we refuse this application. All those in favour of refusal, please show. And those against? Do we need to take it to the... yes, we do. It's been proposed and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. And those against? That application has been granted. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go to page 1 on the agenda. That's Haworth Timber, Gleveland Road sale. We have Miss Kate Newman speaking against this application. Would you like to take a seat, Miss Newman, and Miss Cole is going to give us some background information.
Thank you, Chairman. The application seeks the provision of additional storage racking within an existing timber storage yard. The external yard also serves as a car park for customers and an area for loading and unloading of delivery vehicles. The key consideration relates to the impact of the proposed development on the amenity of neighbouring residential properties on Florence Street and Elm Grove in terms of noise, light, overbearing and visual amenity. The acoustic report submitted with the application confirms that there will be no need for the use of forklift trucks outside of business hours. It's considered that the proposal would benefit neighbouring properties in terms of reducing existing noise from forklift truck movements, and a condition is recommended to ensure that these vehicles are restricted to business hours. The proposed racking itself is considered to be of an appropriate height and distance from neighbouring properties to ensure that there will be no unduly overbearing impact or loss of light. The development is an appropriate feature within the existing timber yard and would not impact on outlook or character of the area. Thank you, Chairman.
Ms Newman, you have 3 minutes.
I am the homeowner of 29 Elm Grove to the northwest corner of the application site, and I wish to speak in objection to this application. The current permitted storage heights where the racking is proposed are 2.1 and 3.3 metres, which is approximately the height of the perimeter fence. When complied with, this causes no visual intrusion to our homes. However, the majority of the proposed racking is 6 metres tall, which is the equivalent to a 2-storey building. This excessive height and the close proximity to our homes would dominate the view from our windows and backyards. The significant visual intrusion will result in our existing view of the sky from our downstairs living room windows being placed with a view of the storage racking. This negative impact has been recognised within the committee report. However, the application is still supported on the basis that it will create additional space, allow for easier access, parking, and reduce noise associated with handling and operations. However, there were only 2 application documents available for public consultation on the online portal: a site location plan with no details of the existing yard arrangement, and a proposed site plan with basic elevation drawings. No evidence has been provided to support the suggested benefits. The committee report does, however, make reference to an acoustic report and a design and access statement, but until yesterday evening, neither of these documents were available on the planning portal for public viewing, which puts me, as a residential neighbour, at a considerable disadvantage. Furthermore, the existing racking already exceeds the height parameters approved in the 2012, demonstrating little regard for the planning process on behalf of the applicant. Based on the significant negative impact to our homes, the lack of information available for public consultation, and the pending investigation by the planning enforcement team, I urge the committee to refuse this application, or at the very least defer it to allow for a fairer and fuller consideration of the application.
Thank you, Ms Newman. If you'd like to return to your seat. Councillor Wetton, you'd like to open the debate.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, could I mention that Councillor Lamb did intend to speak on this item. He called it in, and he had been led to believe that it was scheduled for the November meeting, and obviously the November meeting was the one where we had the very big application, so I presume that was why it's listed tonight. And tonight, Councillor Lamb has an engagement which is a long-standing commitment. So I just wanted to explain that, particularly because it's actually mentioned in the late representations. The essence of this application, I think, is in the history of the site in its present use, i.e. since it was a laundry, since it became a timber yard. It started that there was no racking permitted. And as time goes by, racking is allowed, and then more racking and more being applied for. And I firmly believe that this application pushes it too far. It's excessive for the site, and it impacts on the surrounding residential properties. And in fairness, the residential properties were there first. We're not going back too far into history, so we are talking about a lot of people who've lived there since before this timber yard moved in. They're outgrowing this site, and the applicant's seeking to go upwards, bursting into the view of residents and creating what I really feel when I walk around there is an oppressive and untidy feel to the area. Now, there's great mention in the report about the movements of forklift trucks, but I cannot accept that this application is justified by the supposed reduction of the movements of forklift trucks. I just don't understand actually how it reduces the number of movements. Wood comes in, it gets stacked. Wood is purchased, so wood is unstacked and loaded to go out. I don't see how this difference in racking makes a difference in the number of movements of the forklift trucks. So I suspect that forklift truck scenario is actually a sprat to catch a mackerel, but in fact, there is actually no sprat. The application pushes the site too far. It's encroaching on neighbouring residential properties by its incremental growth of racking. It's got too much now. It's too much. It needs halting before the ambitions of Haworth go even higher still. So on that basis, I would certainly echo the desires of the resident who's spoken, and I would move that we refuse permission for this application.
Thank you, Councillor Wetton. Any other members wish to comment? Councillor Bunting.
Yes, may I ask a question as well through you, Chairman? Initially, there's already been mentioned about the vehicle movements in and out, or within the site, but I'm also thinking about the delivery vehicle movements, which obviously more racking would presumably allow greater stocks to be kept and therefore more deliveries. Now, the existing delivery routine already causes quite a bit of difficulty on Glebelands Road because they block the road when they're making their deliveries. It's essentially a large wagon parked up, blocking half the road, with a man standing there waving two cars through one way, then waving two cars through the other way, while there's a huge queue of traffic, while they start unloading all the wagons. Now, I'm not sure through you, Chairman, if I may ask what the existing agreement is for blocking the road to make deliveries, and what is the anticipated change in the number of deliveries as a result of these amendments to the racking, which will increase the capacity within the site, because it already causes a problem. And if it's going to be a wagon on there for longer and more often, then that's going to be another issue.
Ms. Coley, would you like to comment on?
Yeah. There's been no information provided as to any change in the deliveries or not. I would assume on the basis that they don't anticipate there being any impact, but I can't be certain of that because we haven't had that information. I don't know what the existing arrangements are in terms of deliveries off Glebelands Road.
They are permitted to block. Microphone. They are permitted to be blocking the road in order to make Glebelands to make their deliveries, because I witnessed it this afternoon as I was
not be controlled through the planning process. They may block the road. It doesn't mean that a planning permission permits them to block the road. It's unlikely that it does, especially one dated from 1981. It's probably silent on that point.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Wetton.
Just to perhaps answer part of that question, I was made aware through highways officers some time ago that the business had undertaken not to unload vehicles onto the road side. They were supposed to, because they use forklift trucks for the unloading, they're only supposed to do it on the pavement side. But in fact, my own observations suggest that there are occasions when they do use forklift trucks on the road, and they do inevitably, they cause problems if they're parking the correct way to unload. When they're parking the incorrect way, they cause greater problems because they block more of the road.
I can't bring you in, Ms Newman, with respect. Thank you. We heard your earlier comments. Thank you. We can't bring you back in. Councillor Patel.
Some questions really. Ms Newman, who mentioned the uploading of an acoustic report only yesterday. I wanted to ask whether that was the case. And there was also mention of ongoing enforcement action on the site and what that proposed. There's a discrepancy here between what's been drawn in terms of the height of the perimeter fence. So there just seems lots of questions here that we need answers.
Ms Coley.
Yeah, yes, certainly I can answer that. Any enforcement action at the site is not relevant to the consideration of this application. You need to consider it entirely on its own merits. In terms of the uploading of the acoustic report, the documents that are required to be uploaded are those for people to be able to take a view on the application. That's the plans. There's no, although the acoustic report forms part of the planning file, there's no obligation for us to put that on the website. So unfortunately, it didn't go up, but it doesn't affect the merits of the proposals. The merits of the proposals are the racking as shown on the plans.
Councillor Carey would like to comment.
Thank you, Chairman. I used to very recently live on Elm Grove. I only moved out a few weeks ago, and I know the area very, very well. And I know that driving down Elm Grove at the moment, just at the bottom, there's a big, massive program going on with a new builder's yard being built on that side with trucks rumbling up and down all day. I know on this side of Gleeblands Road, I witness it. I used to witness it every day, as Councillor Bunting said, about the unloading problems onto Gleeblands Road. They talk here about the alley here, the Ginnell at the end. I think that's at the end of Florence Street there. I forgot the number of that house there. And that's where the racking will be quite high. But is it number 27 maybe? I think, is it? You live out, sorry, number 27, yeah. Yeah, number 27. And he talks here that it's quite a distance away. It says 7.5 metres. It doesn't seem like that down there. I just think there's a lot of development going on around there, like Councillor Wetton said about the development. They're getting too big for that site. At the moment, I'm saying to reject this proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carey. I'll just give you some of my own comments. I visited the site, and as Ms Collier said, I think, and I've been guilty of this in the past, but we can't use planning permissions to direct applicants to behave in a way that we'd wanted to. The unloading and loading or whatever's happening on Gleeblands Road, blocking the road with wood and forklift trucks, is not something we can use to determine this application. I know how frustrating that is. The local councillors are aware of it. We've heard Councillor Bunting, Councillor Carey have witnessed it, but we cannot use misbehaviour on the parts of an applicant to determine an application. We must look at it on the merits of the application itself. Now, if we were to do that, what I've just said not to do, the applicant can appeal against it and they would win their appeal and costs would be made against this authority. Now, put that one side. The application itself, I genuinely don't have a problem with it. The racking is tall. It's not pretty, but it is a timbers yard. It is a timbers yard. It'll always be a timbers yard as far as I can see, and you will never make it attractive. You'll never make it nice. One thing that has been added to the late information, Ms Coley's pointed out, is the control of the forklift trucks. They should not be operating outside working hours and shouldn't be going at 6:30 in the morning, as a comment from residents have said, and I'm comfortable with that. But I stress to members, we need to look at the application as it stands. I'm happy to take anybody. Councillor Wetton.
Chair, I just wanted to clarify, I was only answering a point that Councillor Bunting raised. I didn't raise anything about the traffic. My concerns are solely about the racking, the growing heights of the racking, and the way they're encroaching into the lives of those local residents who've been there a long time, and they don't deserve this sort of literally growing problem, growing up through their what they can see from their windows, whichever windows it may be. They're not a good neighbour. They're not a tidy neighbour. They're inconsiderate in their operation of the site, which I think is, you know, the planning elements of that you're referring to, the hours of operation, etc. And I just think that allowing them to put even more racking in, higher racking, is going to mean more vehicle movements, more forklift truck movements on that site, more a disturbance and distress to the local residents. Those are my concerns. So I'm certainly not deflected by the argument about the lorries. It's purely the site I'm talking about and what's happening on there.
Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Wetton. It's running late. We've got another application to determine this evening. I'm going to move to the vote. Has it been moved and seconded refusal? You're happy to second it? Councillor Wetton proposed refusal. So Councillor Bunting has seconded.
Reasons, but I can.
Reasons for refusal?
Yeah, would be the visual impact of the proposals on neighbouring properties through size and scale of the racking. Yeah.
Can we use disamenity to residents? Is that?
I wouldn't recommend it because there's no evidence that would worsen.
Okay, we're going to move to the vote. All those in favour of refusing this application, please show. Sorry. Those against refusal. That application has been refused. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go to page 26. That's the final application this evening, 32 Peel Road in Hale. There are no speakers on this item. Just the water.